Chapter 1066. Deep Blue World. This was a sensitive word for Luonan. His attention was diverted a bit and he asked, "You've been to the Deep Blue World? How hard can it be?" Black Lion's palm could rub flowers on his belly, but it made him appear more relaxed. His expression of sudden realization was extremely vivid. "Oh right. You came from Xia City. No wonder. Although I can't say that every extraordinary knows about the Deep Blue World, I'm afraid that Ouyang Chen is the only one who is still kept in the dark despite his high status and ranking. He's a pure technical person. His connections are truly the shame of the extraordinary." Luonan looked at him very seriously and responded, "You guys are afraid of me." Did Black Lion really think that he didn't know about the messy matters within the Ability User Society and among the extraordinary? Forget it. I was the one who didn't keep my mouth shut. Black Lion decisively gave in. Then he smacked the swan's neck with force, emitting muffled sounds. "So what if you know the location of the Deep Blue World? The Mariana Trench isn't a place you can casually go. Brother, do you really think that as an extraordinary you can ride this toy and dive 10,000 meters to the bottom of the sea? Not necessarily." Luonan responded simply, but he was deep in thought. What kind of water vapor configuration could resist and even utilize the vile, high-pressure environment of the deep sea? Black Lion emphasized, "In the enormous Earth, Poseidon is the only one who can come and go freely without relying on specialized deep-sea ships, including the extraordinary. As for other people, so what if they come to the Deep Blue World for a 7-day tour, a 10-day tour or a long vacation tour? What they see is what Li Wei wants them to see." The topic was a bit off-topic, but the general direction was clearly deeper. So Luonan was willing to continue the discussion with Black Lion. "According to what you're saying, doesn't the Deep Blue World become Li Wei's private property? Whatever he says goes. You guys and investors like Old Els, all let him do as he pleases? Old Els. He." Black Lion's attitude was quite disdainful. It was the same attitude as when he had exploded Luonan's head with a finger. Old Els is nothing but a pitiful worm with his balls pinched. As time wears on, he has less and less strength to fight back. "Oh! Otherwise, why do you think he would come to such a small trade fair?" Li Wei didn't even need to say anything. It was just Wang Yu's promise that she would draw out the in-progress results of the Bloodline project in advance to help him extend his life. That's why he came over eagerly for the Distortion Technology Exchange Conference. In fact, those who are familiar with him know that Old Els has never been interested in distortion technology. He is happy to use it to earn money, but he would never want to bet his future on it. The amount of information contained in these words was quite large. Luonan digested it as he blurted out a question. "He doesn't like mutants." "Why? What else can it be?" "Because of his greed. He has always wanted to take the orthodox path, and because he believes that only by studying the evolution of supernatural abilities step by step can he truly gain a brand new life, so that his ugly, rotten, stinky skin can regain its youth." The Black Lion freed his hand and gestured with his thumb, index, and middle fingers. Then, he pressed his thumb back. "It's a pity that this path came to an end a long time ago. It used to be a fork in the road. This path is no longer popular. At least, it's not mainstream now." 3 forks. Luonan thought for a moment. One is orthodox evolution. The other is mutant technology. What's the last one? It's the Bloodline project. The Apocalypse Laboratory is currently pushing hard. Who knows how many old dogs are sticking out their tongues right now, waiting to lick their bones to quench their cravings. The Black Lion still didn't hold back with his words, but he still maintained respect for Luonan. "Speaking of which, this isn't really suitable for a long chat. How about we go get a cup of coffee?" Adding a bit of other liquid ingredients to this fake body seems pretty good?" Luonan could see that the Black Lion was trying to regain the initiative in the conversation. For this reason, He spoke of all sorts of dark secrets and secrets, not even bothering to beat around the bush. Of course, he probably really did have the habit of selling people out. It was also possible that these things weren't considered to be amazing secrets within the circle of extraordinaries. Sure. It's good to go replenish its water. Luonan agreed quite straightforwardly. Luonan didn't mind temporarily relinquishing control, as long as the other brought out enough information for the price. He really wanted to observe the reactions of the others up close. He wanted to see Li Wei's position and influence in the hearts of these extraordinaries. Luonan put away the reaction furnace as he spoke. He tossed Niu Gui into the middle of the swimming pool and turned around to float back to where Blood Demon and Wan Luhua were. Luonan's position. Black Lion gave up on the White Swan in a straightforward and efficient manner. He leapt onto the shore of the pool, sticking out his belly and his face to play host. The level of the jadeite light could be seen at this moment. Even though not every management and service staff possessed the ability to view supernatural phenomena as ordinary, there was always a need for customers. There were always enough people. A group of strictly trained service staff were already in place while Luonan and Black Lion were conversing in the center of the pool. Now they were serving drinks, beverages, and refreshments like flowing water. These esteemed guests had to be satisfied. At the very least, they couldn't find any mistakes. However, no one would take these refreshments seriously. Aside from Blood Demon and Wan Luhua, who had a rough idea of what was going on and could be ignored for the time being, everyone else had their own plans. Black Lion had finally managed to invite Luonan back with great difficulty. If they didn't probe the thoughts of this young and headstrong expert now, when would they be able to do so? Well, directly probing wouldn't be appropriate, so they would chat first. It just so happened that the three forks in the path of the evolution of extraordinary powers were never outdated topics among the upper echelons. Everyone had something to say, more or less. Luonan's knowledge was greatly broadened. Combining the information from various parties, he was able to understand that evolution, mutation, and bloodline were the three most important research directions that revolved around the evolution of life and extraordinary powers in the last 20 to 30 years. Among them, evolution was to use normal people and metahumans as a frame of reference. With genetic science as the foundation, they researched and created an ability matching and point adding route in an attempt to deduce the perfect template for human superpowers so that normal people could make the leap to metahumans and continue to evolve. This research path was once flourishing. Many people benefited from it. There were even some people present who obtained inspiration during that stage, allowing them to ascend to the level of extraordinary in one fell swoop. Master Wan rose up during that time. Blood Demon directly pointed out his name. "Aren't you?" Wan Luhua responded with a question. "I'm Wild Fox Zen." Blood Demon laughed, but he didn't deny it outright. "I fattened up quite a bit that time. My fleshly body. Of course, more of it collapsed." Luonan listened to them talk about old times. He didn't interrupt. He listened with great interest. During this time, Luonan felt as if Wan Luhua's gaze had shifted a bit more to his body. Chapter 1067. Most of the Transcendents present sighed when they talked about the old days of that era. According to them, the various powers of the inner world were mostly supporters of the research on the evolutionary route. They had invested a lot in it, but they had also profited greatly. However, in the mid to late 80s, this research route continuously ran into problems. It was said that the accumulation of genetic engineering was insufficient, and there were problems with the design of the key projects. Their actions were also too radical, which led to many serious accidents. It even led to the loss of a few transcendent seeds with great prospects. This caused the relevant research organizations to suffer greatly, and the investors gradually became more conservative. As for the inner world, there were even serious conflicts because of this. The gratitude and grudges within were difficult to describe in detail. The evolutionary route fell into a stagnation period and there were some setbacks. This was actually a very normal thing in the process of scientific research. The problem was that at that stage, a powerful substitute had appeared: the archetype format. Once the archetype format theory came out, Deep Blue was established and outshone the others in the relevant field. Capital and resources tended to be concentrated, and under this situation, the evolutionary route suffered the most painful blow. Project Deep Blue was indeed a monster with an enormous appetite. When the project first started, it practically swept away all the original research organizations and talents of the evolutionary route. Some of the research results were also used by Deep Blue, and it gradually turned into a path of human body strengthening and modification, which was the prerequisite for burners. If not for this, and they really had to start from scratch, it would have been very difficult for Project Deep Blue to produce such mature and complete results as burners and Deep Blue platform in a short 3 to 5 years. All this time, the inner world had the custom of saying no to modified humans, and there was a lot of rejection towards burners. Apart from the sense of superiority from self-awakening, the experience of being possessed was also one of the reasons. Of course, there was also the godly operation of saying that burners were not modified humans and swallowing the words that had been spat out. That was a matter of another level. Speaking of this, Black Lion was still trying to sell Old Els for a good price. Old Els hated this to no end. In the 70s and 80s, Old Els had always been an important investor in this field. Under his leadership, when the LCRF was first established, he took out a lot of resources and invested them, but in the end it almost went to waste. The fact that the Deep Blue project was able to receive $1 trillion investment when it was first established has nothing to do with the investors' vision. Instead, it's largely because the investors are seeking to prevent losses. The Blood Demon concluded simply, "It's like making a wedding dress for someone else." But now, aren't they still shouting, "How nice?" Black Lion didn't respond to this topic. He just faced Luonan and said, "Forgive me for speaking bluntly. It doesn't matter if it's the archetype format or formatting theory. In that period of time, it could be said that standard conceptual design defeated basic research. Evolution is basically an extension of the original technical route. It seems stable, but in fact, there is still a lack of accumulation. Most of the time, I can't see any difference from the basic research of the past. The lack of surprises in the capital market was why the Deep Blue project had replaced it with the fresh and feasible archetype format theory. But up until now, not a single burner has been able to enter the domain of transcendence. The Tao is the pinnacle, and their accomplishments are locked. And that's because they haven't been able to explore the foundational level and make the most fundamental changes. Brother, if you can make formatting theory sink even further and come up with a feasible framework at the genetic level, it would be a great achievement. There was the smell of a serious discussion. Luonan didn't want to get involved in academic discussions, but he didn't want to stray too far from the topic. He gave a slight nod, accepting Black Lion's opinion. Soon, he brought the topic back. According to what you're saying, the mutation and bloodline projects are very much in line with the logic of capital? That's right. Black Lion spoke with great confidence. Look, the basic purpose of the aberration technology is to adapt and correct the irreversible effects of aberrations. As long as we're still surrounded by aberrations, as long as the aberration infection isn't eliminated, this research must continue. This is a necessity and there's a huge market for it. As for the Bloodline project, it was personally led by Li Wei. It's the most mysterious and high-end project. There's even a saying that it's a reverse decryption route. It's a reference to some existing perfect template to extract golden stem cells. The surrounding air flow was a bit sluggish, but it was still within an acceptable range. Luonan laughed. Perfect template? What perfect template? Plus, does this have anything to do with templates? Luonan didn't continue to speak after a few mocking words. He didn't continue the conversation either. He just swept his gaze over to 2Go before returning to the domain of mutation. You just said that mutation research is very profitable in the market? Of course. Plus, the closer the research target is to people, the more money there is. It can't be infection prevention and control, right? Hee. Brother, why do you ask when you already know the answer? You've seen the materials in Clay's laboratory. I don't need to remind you. Right now, this controllable mutation technology is becoming more and more popular in the investment circle. It used to be deep underwater, but looking at it now, it's like a deep water bomb. Perhaps a large oil field will be blown up. Luo Nan had a bad feeling when he heard Black Lion's explanation. The hotter this domain is, the more it proves. The mutation infection has already gone out of control. Black Lion rapped the table with his thick knuckles, causing the water in the cup to ripple. I don't need to say anything. The area I'm in has never been good. All sorts of vagrant laws have been rolled out in the other territories. They're pretty much a complete mess. The most direct problem is that the mutation infection has gone through several generations of transmission and mutation. The infected can no longer be simply described as a monster that has gone berserk. The transmission power hasn't decreased, and statistics have become even more difficult. No one can clearly calculate this mess. Not to mention that there are all sorts of people and powers adding fuel to the fire. The corresponding acceptance rate is increasing without end. The eastern part of the old continent is a conservative region. They have always severely rejected problems involving genetic pollution. You can't use your way of thinking to expand to the entire world. For the sake of expanding the mutation infection, a special orgy is being held. Do you want to know more about it? In many cities of the new continent, if a young person hasn't participated in this sort of party, then they're considered to be behind the times. Also, let's not talk about anything else. There are quite a few mutation-infected people on this ship. A large number of high-level bodyguards have already undergone body modification or mutation modulation. Otherwise, it would be hard for them to even find a job. This is an open secret of high society. Black Lion talked without end. Evidence emerged one after another. Actually, Luo Nan had heard Peony talk about these things before. It wasn't anything new, and he wasn't particularly surprised. He just muttered to himself. Black Lion finally concluded, the objective situation is like this. Everyone understands it, but they don't make it public. Everyone has their own plans. The problem is that the subjective thoughts displayed from this are the most crucial. In the minds of those who approve of this trend, the mutation can already be viewed as another kind of awakening. Before Black Lion could finish his summary, at least 3 extraordinaries in the surroundings let out cold snorts or sneers. Black Lion acted as if he didn't hear anything. He continued to add, it's not just those idiots who join in the fun and chase after fashion. In fact, this is becoming more and more like a new consensus in the capital circles, in a considerable portion of the ruling circles, and even in some circles of the inner world. Chapter 1068. Black Lion was eloquent with his words. He jumped to old airs in an instant when he spoke of distortion. The old man is stubborn on this point. You guys understand the mind of an old man. Even though distortion is the most likely way to make a lot of money, and it is an irresistible trend, he still has some reservations. He rejects it greatly and doesn't trust this train of thought. So you don't find him pleasing to the eye. Blood Demon sneered as he forcefully interrupted. Distortion is an awakening. You're the most enthusiastic advocate of this sort of laughable saying, right? That's where you're wrong. No matter what other places are like, the Ping Trade Experimental Zone in Bansheng is still fine. Black Africa, where I'm from, and the subcontinent of the old continent are all obvious living experiment sites. In the traditional research system, they have their own unique value. The problem is that the core technology will always be hard to grasp in our hand. Distortion technology is the same. If the trend is conservative and the status quo is maintained, it won't be too bad for us rentiers. But if the trend is radical and the experimental field loses its uniqueness, its value will be weakened, and there will be no production of technology. Where will I get my money from? So not only do I not advocate, I deliberately keep a low profile. This is my basic stance. I can't be wrong at all. Blood Demon raised his eyebrows. He still wanted to bicker with Black Lion, but Luonan took a step ahead and said, "We can discuss Mr. Black Lion's position later. However, Old Els is a big capitalist. He doesn't have a technical background. What is the core of his insistence? Is it the intuition of surpassing technical personnel, or is it purely conservative?" Actually, these words were not directed at Black Lion. Instead, he looked at Tu Gu and Wang Yong. Those two certainly wouldn't answer. Luonan just wanted to see their reactions. Unfortunately, the poker faces behind the two sunglasses were emotionless faces. In the end, Black Lion took over the conversation. The old man really is conservative in thinking on this point. He has said more than once that distortion technology is too chaotic. It's hard to end things after a good start. Then I really have to look at him in a different light. Luonan followed up with a question, what's Li Wei's stance on distortion technology? He himself has never commented on the distortion technology in public. However, many of the newest gene editing technologies in the distortion laboratory are products of the Bloodline Project. What do you think his stance is? Oh, understandable. Luonan laughed. If the mutated infection on Earth did not continue to spread, where would Li Wei get the ingredients for the advanced formula? Regardless of the attitude of the key personnel, it had to be admitted that what the Black Lion said was indeed the reality. But when it came out of his mouth, it tasted different. Before he could think it through, Black Lion's topic had already piqued the interest of the others. The extraordinaries present had all come from an era where the path of evolution had flourished and was soon to be severed. They had also spent half their lives competing against aberrations. They had the right to speak about the battle of paths and the changes in the situation. However, their perspective was not from an economic or social point of view. Instead, they were looking at something more direct and purer. As Constance said, evolutionary awakening, or the so-called aberration awakening, to determine which is more correct, in the end, we have to return to the most core argument. What triggered the era of distortion and allowed the ability users to step onto the stage of history? If it's the aberration itself, then there's no reason to resist it. But if it's another factor, then we need to carefully consider it. Blood Demon clenched his fist in front of Constance's hood. The strength of his palm and fingers clenched together actually stirred the air, emitting a buzzing, trembling sound. We still haven't found the X factor. However, I still don't believe that this kind of intense, surging supernatural power, which I can use like a finger, is the creation of a patchwork of deranged genes. I'd rather set my sights on the abyssal region for the same reason. At the very least, my fleshly body can feel and use that place. Blood Demon cast his gaze at Wan Luhua as he spoke. She responded with a smile. In the initial stages of research, introducing large amounts of new variables will only cause more trouble. Wan Luhua's answer was even simpler, but the new variables she spoke of were clearly referring to the aberration technology and the corresponding foreign genes. Her attitude was extremely clear. Comparatively speaking, Constance and the Star Shaman had a bit more uncertainty in their thinking, but this was limited to theoretical discussions. Luonan listened to their discussion and debate, and he soon came to a clear understanding. In this domain, the extraordinaries who already had a first-mover advantage took the conservative path of evolution. They used their own extraordinary talent to dig out their own potential. They were all on high alert toward the infiltration and influence of the mutated genes. Even the Black Lion, who benefited from the aberration technology, had a more pure and rational cultivation. However, although there were no transcendents present, there were still a portion of them who were particularly unrestrained. As for who they were, it was easy to tell. Basically, the existences in the sequence of cubes were more dangerous, especially those who were nomads in the wilderness. For example, Raby the clown who once fought the High Lord of Secret Contract was a typical mutant who was sometimes clear-headed. There was also Poseidon, who was the root of the mutants. Among them, Black Lion was considered a typical conservative. Luonan was gathering and digesting information, but some people felt that he had been silent for too long. The Star Shaman's debate had failed, so he suddenly turned to ask, "What do you think, Professor Luo?" Speaking of which, Professor Luo had almost single-handedly reversed the direction of psychic research. Shouldn't he be the one to take responsibility for this sort of problem? To the side, Blood Demon took a sip of his drink. "TSK. This orange juice is sour." Luonan blinked. Did he run into the grudges of the academic world? According to what the Star Shaman had said, reversing the direction of psychic research was most likely referring to the classical theoretical framework of 3 levels, 1 region, and 1 domain that was overthrown by the prison theory. This kind of theoretical system was certainly the conclusion of an authoritative master of the psychic side. With the ranking of psychic transcendence, it was possible that the Star Shaman and even the Death Shaman had contributed to this. This was normal. Frankly speaking, Luonan was considered an amateur when it came to aberration technology. But he had a unique advantage when compared to others. He had once stayed in the environment of the relay station, and the relay station was a typical environment in the light concealment star system that had suffered from the pollution of sin poison. Sin poison and aberration were fundamentally different. Aberration mainly came through the pollution of foreign genes. Sin poison came through more complex changes that might involve fundamental laws. Carried out a more comprehensive influence, but the external phenomena and effects of the two could be compared to each other. At the very least, they both affected the foundation of the existence of life. This was especially true when it came to racial evolution and cultivation. With the example of the Heavenly Yuan Empire as a precedent, Luonan knew that aberrations could occur at any time, producing complex and unstable genomes. This was a terrible thing for the cultivation of a population. Even with the accumulation of the Heavenly Yuan Empire, they had to spend an enormous amount of manpower and material resources to endlessly modify their foundational techniques in order to adapt. But the frequency of changes grew faster and faster since Sin Calamity began. This was definitely not a good sign. Liang Lu had also said that if the situation in the light concealment star system continued for another 1,000 years, it was very likely that there would only be a group of species that preserved the glorious memories of the Heavenly Yuan Empire, but they were completely different from their ancestors. Forgive Luonan for his conservative thinking. This sort of situation was ultimately not good. Chapter 1069. This was Luonan's basic line of thought. However, he had never systematically researched the current mutation technology, nor had he ever thought deeply about what the most reasonable evolutionary path for the human population should be. Therefore, he still held back a bit in his speech. If the current mutation technology is based on the widespread adoption of foreign genes as a basic starting point, carrying out reconstruction, or simply seeking to mutate after infection, then I feel that we shouldn't use the word awakening. It will cause misunderstandings. To put it bluntly, genetic modification or recombination are both more appropriate. However, if it really is an example that I've seen before, then mutation is still the most appropriate word. It allows one to understand the high degree of uncertainty of foreign genetic contamination and the consequences of mutation. There's no need to confuse other concepts. Star Shaman laughed when he heard this. Professor Luo's way of speaking is a bit like a spokesperson. It's watertight, but it lacks the drive to subvert tradition from earlier. Actually, I'm quite looking forward to the dominant force of someone other than myself. Luonan looked at this pretty boy extraordinary, ignoring the obvious mockery and hidden stabs in Star Shaman's words. Luonan had experienced the relay station and had come into contact with the silhouette of the heavenly Yuan Empire's struggle in the Hongguang system. He was solemn and serious when it came to such topics. He would not argue with others with his emotions. He maintained a calm attitude and organized his thought. He responded in a manner that was neither fast nor slow. The topic of evolution is far too big, especially when it is magnified to the level of a population. It's not wrong to consider a broader path of choice. It's fine to discuss the angle of entry and the direction of the future. It's just that one must be more cautious than the last step. I very much agree with Ms. Wan's words on this point. The research is still in its initial stages. The structure of the body has yet to be completely explored and its marvels exhausted. Rashly introducing external factors will only make matters more complicated. For me, if I want to complete a work, I'll need to make a large system before the core design and train of thought is clear and refined. I won't rule out the possibility of success, but that's a standard gamble of probability. One general achieves success on the bones of 10,000 people is an optimistic estimate. Therefore, first solidify basic research step by step, from simple to complex, obtain a method theory, and then guide practice. This path is a bit old, but it's still more realistic, right? The Star Shaman frowned. He was quite surprised that Luonan, who had been willful and unbridled, would be so steady and conservative when discussing this topic. He wanted to argue, but his status as an extraordinary and his basic intellect still made him relatively rational in the end. He just shook his head slightly. The current situation is that even if the extraordinary from back then didn't have the ability to do so, they wouldn't have been able to do so. The evolutionary path also had a considerable proportion of people who used the template of extraordinaries to reverse engineer it. On this point, there is no difference between evolution, mutation, and bloodline. Can basic research derive supernatural powers from traditional basic research? Blood Demon jumped out to object before Luonan could say anything. Xing, you're being unkind. Can the research before World War III and the research after World War III be the same? Have you broken the definition of basic research? Wan Luhua also said, the basic research and theories regarding supernatural powers have always been enriching. The research on the X factor of the external environment, the research on the internal genes, and also the research on aberrations. It's more appropriate to look at it in a comprehensive manner. They are indeed influencing each other. This was a fair statement. Wan Luhua paused for a moment before smiling once more. I feel that the concept of configuration that Mr. Luo proposed on the basis of formatting theory is quite good. Under special circumstances, the adaptability and adjustment of the body and mind must be taken into consideration. A completely new life structure needs to be sufficiently coordinated with the internal and external environment. My school calls this a secret contract, while Mr. Luo calls it configuration. Constance followed up with her words. This is too rough. Black Lion is completely correct in saying that it's a concept design. Blood Demon chuckled. That's why we need to search for the details and rules behind the roughness. From the looks of things, Brother Luo has walked to the forefront. He's at least in the first echelon. He's much more reliable than aberrations. I don't deny it. Constance actually expressed her approval, catching many people off guard. No one knew what kind of expression Constance had under her hood, but her voice was exceptionally calm. Actually, I like the cage theory a bit more. It can open up an unprecedented train of thought. These people seem to be talking about matters on the genetic level when they talk about evolution. But clearly, the development of the mental side is much less restricted. The powerful ego of ability users and the introduction of the mental plane are destined to be impossible to rely solely on the research of the objective world. The existence of the ego and the mental world are equally important. It's better to have new subversive theories added to the mix than a pool of stagnant water. The star shaman had one hand on his hip. He had a bitter smile on his face. Clearly, Constance's stabbing in the back wasn't light. However, with these words, the topic shifted to the mental side and the fleshly side. There was absolutely no need to worry about awkward silence in this field that involved the direction of human evolution and the fundamentals of cultivation. But this way, the sensitive topic that had nearly stabbed Li Wei in the face was unconsciously dispelled. Luonan glanced over and saw Black Lion rubbing his belly with a grin. Luonan didn't mind this at all. In fact, listening to these extraordinaries discuss whether the fleshly side or the mental side was more suitable for conducting pilot research had stirred up his thoughts. He couldn't help but think of the vicious environment of the relay station. From what Luonan had seen in reality, it could be said that the fleshly foundation was more stable than the mental plane. Under the vile environment of the light concealment galaxy, people practically didn't have the leeway to release their soul strength. Even if they could release their soul strength, they needed to be extremely cautious and possess a corresponding medium. In this way, the glorious achievements of the related fields suffered a destructive blow. Even those existences on the pure mental plane, like the magnetite mica jellyfish, were tyrannical enough to survive in the vicious environment. They still needed to borrow a material medium like water vapor and the like. A medium? Did he make a mistake earlier? A light flashed, and Luonan's telepathic thoughts subconsciously swept through the clouds in the sky. Then he clapped his hands, drawing everyone's attention. "Brother Luonan?" Black Lion turned his eyes over. "Do you have any brilliant ideas?" Of course, Luonan couldn't say that he had been lost in thought just now and had suddenly broken through an important mental checkpoint for restoring the magnetite mica jellyfish. He just laughed and shook his head, but everyone else was staring at him. He couldn't just let this pass. He muttered to himself for a moment, then said, "I'm just thinking that the things we've discussed are a bit more general, and the construction elements are a bit less detailed. This only proves that our overall understanding is far too lacking. It's not just about ourselves but also the present, including the future environment." As he spoke, he thought of Her Majesty Empress Wu's judgment that the mental side had no future. He also thought of Liang Lu's cautious and meticulous attitude when it came to the lamination interference technology. Luonan had a feeling in his heart, and this led to the next proposition. "I heard you guys talk about the X factor. Is it referring to the conditions that ability users have suddenly produced since the era of distortion?" Blood Demon rubbed his chin. "This suddenly is quite intelligent. Suddenly rising. Suddenly falling. Suddenly changing." Luonan repeated the word suddenly several times. It was impossible to express his current feelings otherwise. Then, will this condition be maintained in the future? Will it produce new changes? If it will, what will cause this change? Will it be controllable or uncontrollable? Just thinking about it gives me a headache. Actually, Luonan wasn't having a headache. It was just a sudden pessimism. Chapter 1070. His experience at the relay station made Luonan suddenly feel, even if the aberration was just a little brother compared to the sinful poison, if the situation were to continue developing like this, Earth would not have the accumulation of the Heavenly Yuan Empire. The Heavenly Yuan Empire would probably be the terminally ill first. The most infuriating thing was that there were still people fanning the flames behind the scenes, intentionally or unintentionally misleading. That's right, he was referring to Li Wei. Luonan believed in the authenticity of the information his father took great pains to leave behind. According to that explanation, that fellow Li Wei, it was outsider. If he made a reasonable inference, then perhaps Liang Lu's Heavenly Yuan Empire, the Star Alliance, and other advanced civilizations had a high degree of connection. Let's not talk about how that fellow came to Earth. Just by looking at his background and knowledge, it was impossible for him to not know the problems that existed in the research of supernatural powers on Earth. And everything he did, his attitude was obvious. That fellow harbored ulterior motives. Luo Nan tossed out a new proposition, then he no longer participated in the discussion. He sat quietly in his chair. His gaze and mental senses naturally flowed around him, gradually expanding from the heated discussion area to the vast expanse of the sea and sky. From his close-up perspective hanging in midair, the jadeite light that carried them was like a city of steel. It rampaged across the ocean, cleaving apart the clouds and turbid waves. It was full of vigor. Perhaps this was the attitude of the extraordinaries before his eyes. These people, who stood at the apex of life on Earth, were passionately discussing. Even though they were perplexed about the present and the future, they had iron wills built upon powerful egos. They were confident that they could conquer all unknowns. But if they were to raise their point of view a bit higher, allowing their field of view to cover several thousand square kilometers of the sea, covering the vast Pacific Ocean, covering the entire Earth, covering the universe that simply could not be covered, what did the jadeite light and the people on it count for? Luo Nan was a bit regretful at this time. During his time at the relay station, he didn't find the time to study the basic general knowledge of the heavenly Yuan Empire. He lacked an understanding of the development context of this high civilization. Otherwise, perhaps he could start a class or something. Luo Nan didn't know how the future would develop. He also believed that even if they encountered trouble, they could still struggle with their lives. Just like the heavenly Yuan Empire, even if they had fallen into the destructive process of the world of calamity, they could still struggle with all their might. However, it still required an advanced civilization. It needed to be established on the basis of a complete worldview of everything in the universe and a perfect theory of population evolution. If there were really unexpected changes in the future, and the Earth was still as primitive as it was now, then there was really no hope. Maybe something should be done. At the very least, they couldn't let Li Wei, the outsider, use his evil thoughts to carve the progress of Earth's civilization. But what should he do? Luo Nan calculated seriously for a moment, and then he suddenly became stupefied. Then he laughed in spite of himself. What's going on? He hadn't even solved his own problems, so why did he have to take on such a strange sense of responsibility? Brother Luo Nan? Black Lion keenly sensed the change in mood. Luo Nan waved his hand, but the sudden thought just now had left a mark on his heart. It wasn't easy to erase it cleanly in a short amount of time. As time passed, the sky darkened bit by bit. Even the altitude of 10,000 meters in the sky began to be gradually dyed with a deep color. Abner looked at his watch. It was already 7 o'clock in the evening in the East and West Districts 12. There was only an hour left before the highly anticipated auction. And right now, he was still on a temporary flight route to the venue. The roar of the plane's engine couldn't cover the sound of footsteps behind him. The Secretary-General of Headquarters, Romanus, was in the prime of his life. He walked behind Abner and placed a flexible e-ink screen filled with words on the desk in front of him. President, this is the revised agenda. Please take a look. The Round Table Conference, where the top experts of the world gathered to discuss matters, was undoubtedly of an extremely high standard. Therefore, as the host, headquarters of the Ability User Society always followed the regular process of organizing and reporting the agenda. They deliberated over the additions and subtractions, preparing to distribute the agenda to all the participants in order to ensure that the agenda was impeccable during the discussion. But the agenda hadn't even been released yet, let alone distributed and notified. This could only prove that this sort of formality was practically broken. Abner didn't say anything, but he also didn't look at the relevant details. At this time, the projector on his desk displayed a few content. It was the identification criteria they had determined earlier on for Gong Qi's murder. After looking over and over again, Abner had long since memorized them like the back of his hand. Number 1, an electromagnetic ability user. Number 2, an extraordinary. Number 3, the micromanipulation ability of the power of the abyss region. Number 4, the ability to burn and absorb flesh and blood. Number 5, the ability to assemble and manufacture machinery. Number 6, the ability to conceal and teleport. Number 7, an ape-like creature. In the previously hastily held identification meeting, no matter what everyone's judgment was, the compatibility between the Mr. Mo and Luo Nan combination and this criterion was announced to be 7 out of 10, except for the electromagnetic ability. And now, with the support of the newest information, the so-called Mr. Mo could practically be erased. There was only one Luo Nan. The compatibility criteria was already 7 out of 10. If he, the president of headquarters, was a bit more frivolous, he could already say things like, "If Luo Nan didn't do this to Gong Qi, I'll eat shit on a live broadcast." The problem was that the clearer it was, the more troublesome it was. Abner didn't show it on the outside, but his head was getting more and more painful. He never expected things to turn out like this when he proposed to adjourn the meeting that day. During the meeting, Ouyang Chun and Her Majesty Empress Wu had a clear and decisive attitude. It made many extraordinaries and various powers, who were used to the peaceful atmosphere of the 90s, instinctively shrink back. This was actually within the scope of Abner's considerations. He even thought of using this opportunity to eliminate a few disobedient people. However, Mr. Mo and Luo Nan's subsequent exposure of the alternate space of his own accord disrupted this rhythm. With concrete benefits placed before their eyes, the contradiction between the Apocalypse Laboratory, headed by Li Wei, and the powerful people of the inner world emerged a bit. There were also the complex demands of the Archons, who ruled over political power and capital. Back then, he proposed to adjourn the meeting in order to better connect the two sides. He wanted to dissolve a portion and highlight a portion. He wanted to focus the contradiction onto Luo Nan to achieve an ideal result. But he never expected it at the time. It was impossible for him to imagine that Luo Nan, after a few dozen hours of silence, would go on a high-profile path from STEM City. He would broadcast live on the beach, go straight to the cruise ship, and fight head-on with extraordinaries. It seemed that Luo Nan had revealed even more flaws, making it easier for people to focus the related crimes and contradictions onto him. However, the influence of this young man rapidly soared from these straightforward and sharp actions. He was like a weight that increased in weight. He wantonly played with the scales of the human heart. Abner's breathing became a bit heavier. The light yellow beard by his lips trembled slightly. He composed himself and turned his gaze to the flexible e-ink screen. However, he didn't look at it in detail. He just asked, "Did Connie send any new information back?" Chapter 1071. "Not yet," Romanus answered very simply. Abner didn't say anything. He just operated a bit in the projection area. He pulled out the intelligence information that Constans had personally organized. Constans made a new round of comparisons between Luo Nan and the 7 criteria for murdering Gong Qi. However, the focus wasn't on the newly confirmed electromagnetic ability. Instead, it was the 6th point, the ability to conceal and teleport. Constans referred to Luo Nan's fight with Tu Gu and Wang Yong, the 2 extraordinaries. He pointed out that Luo Nan's core method of reversing or controlling the situation was the technique of the spacetime domain. It could be said that this method was no longer something that could be effectively covered by words like technique. Constans' original words were, "We just need to verify Luo Nan's level in controlling the spacetime domain in his fleshly state. Unless one has the determination to fight to the death, a meticulous plan, a loss of face, and a disregard for the losses, the chances of killing Luo Nan are extremely small. The difficulty exceeds 95% for extraordinaries. There were less than 100 extraordinaries in the entire world. In other words, Constance had placed Luo Nan among the top few in the world when it came to judging criteria of difficulty to kill. Perhaps even Abner wasn't among them. Of course, Constance made the premise very clear. He had yet to completely verify how Luo Nan was able to operate the space-time domain while carrying a skeletal fleshly body. Perhaps Luo Nan was the next Gong Qi? The entire inner world cried out in surprise when Gong Qi displayed the extraordinary ability of void shift back in the day. This was an undying godly technique. But in reality, this was just a godly technique on the soul level. Once the fleshly body was shackled, it would fall by several levels. Now Gong Qi was dead. He died by Luo Nan's hands. It was quite ironic when he thought about it. Abner thought about Gong Qi and thought about Jin Tong. The deaths of two extraordinaries in less than a year were inextricably linked to Luo Nan. And these two extraordinary lives had truly verified Luo Nan's extraordinary lethality. One for offense and one for defense. Two hard poles crossed here. Even if there were all sorts of subtle joints, even if they couldn't reach the theoretical pinnacle, so what? A battle record was a battle record. No one could deny it. Abner sighed again. He made corresponding adjustments to Luo Nan's position in his heart. Only then did he look at the flexible e-ink screen on the table. His eyes and fingers swept across it at the same time. Let's change the time first. Let's tentatively set it at 10. Romanus, who was behind him, replied simply, "Okay." Initially, they had set the round table conference to be held at 8 o'clock in the evening. Yes, it coincided with the auction. For some of the participants, it was very unfriendly, it was practically making things difficult for them, that was the truth. However, as the live broadcast on T-City's beach continued to ferment, an unconfirmed horizontal line was marked under the meeting time. The necessary part of the meeting notice had been postponed again and again. Now it was finally time to change it completely. There was no other way. As the organizers of the conference, they needed to take Luo Nan's thoughts into consideration. He also needed to observe and wait for the inevitable variables brought about by Luo Nan to be more exposed. As for tentative, it meant that he could postpone it further. Abner swiped his finger downwards as if he was reading seriously, but most of his energy was focused on the conversation with his secretary. Suddenly, he brought up another topic. "What do you think Lord Secret Contract is doing?" Romanus maintained his silence this time. Abner's finger finally stopped on the third item on the agenda. According to the current arrangement of the agenda, the first two items were to continue the contents of the last identification meeting, to clearly identify Gong Qi's murderer. The second item was to discuss and decide on how to deal with the murderer. However, this was not a simple identification meeting. It was a high-level conference that had been thoroughly prepared. Even if it was just a gesture, the important participants had to have the right to know and the core participants had the right to propose and deliberate on the agenda. Abner sent a draft agenda to the leaders of the three major secret orders, high-level representatives like Director Mao, and some powerful local powers leaders. He asked the other party to propose amendment. This was the process of communicating, discussing, compromising, and even making peace before the meeting. It was the most important part of a large-scale conference. There was no other. The responses from all sides were basically in line with expectations, except for the eye of the secret contract. What Abner said here was twofold. One was naturally the movements of Blood Demon and Wan Luhua. The actions of these two were open and aboveboard, but they brought about undercurrents on a deeper level. They set off an enormous maelstrom that was hard to see with the naked eye. Everyone knew that Blood Demon and Lord Secret Contract had a deep friendship. As for Wan Luhua, she was tantamount to being the spokesperson of the Eye of Secret Contract. The two were advancing and retreating together with Luo Nan in a public setting. The meaning behind this was obvious. The Eye of Secret Contract. Abner's finger gently rubbed against the flexible screen, causing the text in that area to slightly warp and glow, reporting the results of the observation and research of the Abyss region, 2086 to 2096, and some deductions. That was the other side of the story. The Eye of Secret Contract really did add a topic, an outline, and a main point. Abner read it seriously, but the more he did so, the more his head hurt. That self-proclaimed future teacher of the old fellow was going to declare his existence. His field of vision shook a bit. Abner's fingers steadily pressed against the flexible e-ink screen. He didn't move, but the entire plane moved. At the same time, the light that seeped in was clearly dimmer. A large amount of clouds swept past outside the porthole, intensifying the trembling of the plane. Romanus frowned slightly and soon received the report from the pilot. He relayed the report as it was. We've encountered high-altitude turbulence. We've entered the clouds to temporarily avoid it. We also need to lower our altitude. We've already contacted the Tower of the Jade Light. We don't need their nonsense. Abner's brows furrowed. Some emotions churned within him. Actually, this had nothing to do with the pilot. It was just that he was able to sense some special information from this sudden jolt and the nothingness of the clouds that struck the plane. It wasn't just him. Romanus, the two of spades who made it onto the Deck magazine rankings for the first time, wouldn't miss out on this either. The two extraordinaries suddenly went silent for a few seconds. Only when the plane stabilized did they start talking again. Abner asked, "How far away are we from the Jade Light?" "Approximately 20 nautical miles. Do you have an estimate of the cloud cover?" "The diameter should be around 300 to 500 kilometers. You've hidden it really well." Romanus gave a simple response. "Yes." As the plane entered the clouds, the two extraordinaries sensed the movement of a certain person's energy within this region. To be more precise, they had only just sensed it. A power layout that caused one's heart to palpitate was arranged within the 1,000-mile cloud layer. It nurtured a marvelous structure that no one could understand. The most inexplicable thing was that it was actually so reserved and deep. "I've never seen it before. Is it Luonan?" Romanus hesitated for a moment before responding. "Perhaps." Chapter 1072. In the end, Abner didn't receive any updates from Constance on the plane. However, when his plane landed on the top deck of the Jade Light, Constance met him at the docking bridge. She brought him the latest information. Everyone was too familiar with each other, so there was no need to exchange pleasantries. Constance took out the video she had personally recorded. The content of the video was the conversation between a few extraordinaries on the pool deck. Aside from the theoretical exchange, there was also Luonan's latest demonstration class. The heavily injured flesh and blood body of the ox demon from Band City exploded into pieces and vaporized in the swimming pool amidst everyone's fervent discussion. The energy converged into the faith crystal hidden within the body. It seemed to have become nutrients, causing the originally empty thicket to become more and more lush and have a more translucent feeling. Of course, it could also be due to the darkening of the sky. One could tell from the color of the sky that this scene had happened not too long ago. Abner's expression was solemn. He flipped the video back and forth on the landing strip, zooming in and out. He watched it with incomparable seriousness. He guessed the various details and all sorts of legal bases. If there was something he didn't understand, he would ask Constance, who was present at the scene, for more information. Why did the so-called god of Band City fall into Luonan's hands and be used by him? Have you determined the specifics? This is easy to guess. It should be the one who was scared away by the Amaterasu Order some time ago. He's from the Great Marsh Order. He's the one Luonan frequently interacted with in Band City. Is that so? Abner had already found the method to contact the Pope of the 100 Anthologies. He hesitated for a moment and felt that he shouldn't waste time on such details. When all was said and done, He was amazed by Luo Nan's technique, which was like the mass and energy conversion, using the mind as a bridge, crossing the natural moat of matter and energy to realize efficient interconversion. This was an extremely important topic in the research of contemporary extraordinaries. To be able to realize this, even if it was only in form, there was still a lot of room for research. Unfortunately, not many details could be seen from such a brilliant technique in the video. Then again, would it really be possible to see it if Luo Nan was present at the scene? Abner raised his head to look at Constance. This eccentric lady was publicly recognized as the #1 boundary master of the inner world. She had deep attainments in the structure of matter, energy, and soul strength. What did she think of it? Connie? Under the combination of the dark sky and the illumination of the runway, Constance's face under the hood was even more difficult to distinguish. Only his green eyes flickered slightly. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she paused for 2 or 3 seconds before speaking with her usual cold and deep voice. Luo Nan is an open person. There's no need to take the risk of starting a war with him. Abner was slightly stunned. He wanted to ask a technical question, but he didn't expect Constance, who was relatively aloof, to be so direct and negative. Perhaps because Abner's expression was too obvious, Constance turned slightly and gestured for him to look in a certain direction. The two of them were currently on the runway at the top of the runway, which was one of the highest points in Emerald Light. From here, across the flat surface of the runway, they could see the bright lights at the bow of the ship, as well as the vague outline of the ship under the lights. However, what Constance wanted Abner to see was actually outside the observable area, in the void where light and shadow intertwined. "Where's Ronan?" Abner was able to sense Luo Nan's existence because the thick clouds in the sky formed a highly connected energy relationship. Indeed, there was no concealment. It was the same as releasing an enormous amount of information on a higher plane without the slightest scruple. Abner believed that Luo Nan knew of his arrival. It was just that Luo Nan had no intention of responding. Perhaps this excessively young and powerful person was certain that no matter which extraordinary came to the ship, they would take the initiative to get close. This was indeed the case. The people on the Emerald Light, as well as the heavyweights who were about to arrive in the surrounding region, were like Abner. They were constantly paying attention to the complex changes in the depths of the clouds. They were no exception. It was too much to say that they were learning, but there was no problem in describing it as experiencing or referencing. According to Abner's own understanding, the structure of the energy that Luo Nan displayed in the depths of the clouds was complex, but it possessed an order and a sense of design that were rarely seen among modern ability users. Moreover, it wasn't an intuitive feeling on the level of common sense. Instead, it was a deeper regularity that required one to use the brain to perform in-depth analysis. This kid. Abner had unconsciously added a restriction when he said these words to prevent others from eavesdropping. However, he didn't finish the second half of the sentence. Romanus, who rarely spoke, sighed with emotion. "It's like he's solving a problem." Abner looked in that direction and nodded. Very accurate. Indeed, Luo Nan's energy movement within the clouds, whether it was the contraction, expansion, or transformation, all of them were deeply methodical. No matter how complex it was, there were very few redundancies. It was simply like a pre-designed program. If it wasn't for the occasional interference and subsequent adjustments, Abner would have believed that the driving force was an artificial intelligence. But this still made people deeply suspect that there was a highly abstract and extremely mature theoretical support behind this complex structural transformation. And this was precisely one of the most coveted values of Luo Nan. Openness is obviously a good thing. Abner sucked in air through his teeth, letting his saliva dry. Then he withdrew his gaze and responded to Constance's attitude. His stance didn't waver. In fact, it became even more resolute. "Connie, this isn't a question of openness or not. In other words, the definition of openness should be defined by more people. Abner lowered his head to look at his watch as he spoke. At this time, the reception banquet before the auction had already begun. There was no one here who would enter the boring social scene, but he needed to see someone. He told Romanus, "Tell Wang Yu to come see me." Romanus was about to agree, but Constance was already shaking his head. There was even a light chuckle coming from his hood. Wang Yu ran away. Maybe she never came. As the president of the headquarters of the Ability User Society, Abner still had the basic cards to play. Approximately 5 minutes later, the incompetent host Wang Yu took the initiative to request a video call with him. The signal connected. The lighting arrangement on the other side was terrible. A large lamp shot out a strong light towards the gloomy sea. Wang Yu was in the dark under the light position. The shadows distorted too much information. Only her voice was respectful. "Mr. President, I'm really sorry. My grandfather's old illness is acting up today. He's in a bad mood. I'm accompanying him on a night fishing trip. I really can't take care of the jadeite light. Besides, I'm just the owner of a ship. I'm just lending out the ship. It probably doesn't make a difference whether I'm there or not." Chapter 1073. Abner was silent for a few seconds. His line of sight cut across the painting of the real-time video. In addition to the somewhat confused and unclear Wang Yu, in the corner, there was a bloated figure wearing a thick hat and wrapping himself in winter clothes. The figure waved towards the camera. It was indeed Bai Hao. This old fellow was like this when he was sick. Looking at him, he had no intention of reminiscing about old times. Abner did not want to complicate things. Moreover, Wang Yu, a young man, already had the qualifications to be independent. Similarly, she also needed to be independent. Therefore, Abner just pretended not to see the details in the corner. His line of sight continued to stare at Wang Yu. He was too lazy to beat around the bush and said directly, "I was invited by you." Mr. President, frankly speaking, this is really quite embarrassing." Wang Yu sighed very obviously. The world is full of twists and turns. When planning the event, who would have thought that a multi-party meeting that could have been a happy one would turn into a situation of competition? It seems that my friendly suggestion was still sloppy. Suggestion? Friendship? Abner's sharp eyes cut Wang Yu back and forth a few times. Sure enough, after jumping off the boat, she simply refused to admit it. Moreover, don't blame Abner for being sensitive. Listening to the words full of twists and turns, why did he feel that this young man was blaming him? The last appraisal meeting was indeed not in the plan. But earlier, he repeatedly provoked Luo Nan to directly kill his way to Ban City. Could it be that you guys can't get away with such a stinky hand? Just before Abner was about to explode, Wang Yu clapped her hands and saluted him with her palms together. "Mr. President, please forgive me. The situation has been distorted to this extent. It is really a big failure on my part as the advisor. I am now accompanying my grandfather to go fishing. In addition to fulfilling my filial piety, I am also enjoying the sea breeze to reflect on myself. Take charge of an area, my ass. She really doesn't regard herself as an adult, does she?" Abner really did not expect that Wang Yu, who had always been calm and collected, would lose face so thoroughly. Moreover, it was in front of his grandfather. The situation was perfect. He could not spit out the words that he had used to denounce Wang Yu. Wang Yu was eloquent, so she took advantage of Abner's choking. "Regardless of whether Mr. President believes me or not, whether it's a suggestion or an arrangement, I'm still aiming for cooperation. Of course, it has to be me. Us leading the cooperation. But in the business world, you take a step forward, I take a step back, and we adjust at any time. Sometimes, when you retrench a little, you feel that it's still okay, so you continue. Sometimes, when you feel that retrenching is too much of a loss, you stop your losses in time." Abner's yellow beard trembled slightly as he looked over coldly. I'm not a businessman. Wang Yu smiled. But I am. Therefore, every move was an investment. After the investment plan was set, the shares could be adjusted and the profits could be reduced, but the predetermined costs could not be easily changed. Otherwise, it would become a gamble. We can work in any industry and do anything, but gambling is never a good thing, isn't it? Abner grinned. It was indeed funny. He had actually been taught a lesson by this young junior with such shallow business knowledge. At this point, there was no point in continuing the conversation. Abner didn't try to win the argument. Wang Yu retreated, and there would definitely be some repercussions, especially in terms of social relations and resources. But with his wealth and accumulation, he could afford it. And tonight, in this matter itself, this young man was already detached enough. It could be said that he was in an invincible position. Continuing the conversation was just asking to be humiliated. At this time, it was Wang Yu who comforted him instead. Well, let's talk about the matter as it stands. In fact, things aren't too bad. The auction is a mess, but the trade fair can still go on. The big exchange of distortion technology still has its place. What do you think? Amidst Wang Yu's sorry, the call ended. Abner's eyes were dark. He had to admit that Wang Yu was very smart. He used an acceptable price to avoid what might be the most dangerous conflict on Earth. And this bastard obviously had a backup plan from the beginning, letting a trade fair take the lead. In this way, the price of his stop-losses was even lower. In comparison, it was true that Abner's side did things too crudely. Abner admitted that he wanted to seize too much from the sudden appraisal meeting. He wanted to fight. He wanted to open the door to a new plane, eliminate dissidents, and reduce the reputation of Xia City's iron triangle within the society. Also, Gong Qi's death forced him to do this. No one lived in a vacuum. It was true that Gong Qi was the core of a power, but cutting out the core did not mean that the power would collapse. The leader's thinking would inevitably be affected and distorted in the complex growth and decline of a power. In comparison, when he saw Wang Yu's decisive actions, he was angry, but he was actually a little bit envious. But soon enough, Abner broke free from his chaotic thoughts. The more realistic problem was, he had to make a decision before the meeting officially began. President, the meeting date and agenda. Do you want to decide? At this moment, Constantine had already left, but Romanus was still there. He didn't seem to have any change in expression because of Abner's failed communication. Abner knew what Romanus meant. If they didn't decide on the meeting date and agenda, then there was no need to hold this highest-level round-table conference tonight. If this was really the case, then they would have to be prepared to be treated as a joke. Abner turned his head and gazed at his secretary-general. What do you think? Romanus hesitated for a moment, but under Abner's strict gaze, he finally gave a constructive opinion. We need to analyze Luo Nan's attitude. Huh! Romanus's eyelids drooped slightly as he flipped through the flexible e-ink screen. It was the first wave of intelligence sent by Constans. If we make a simple summary, his attitude towards this clearly targeted plot against him is that he doesn't deny it. He doesn't care. But he shows his claws and teeth in action. He's a good teacher. There's a contradiction in this. Fierce in appearance but weak in heart? Abner shook his head in denial as soon as the words left his mouth. It doesn't seem like it. No matter what it is, he has a goal. It's just that it seems to be a mismatch with what we are concerned about. Romanus switched the flexible screen to the video personally recorded by Constans, but he did not look at it. Instead, he raised his head and met Abner's gaze. President, don't you think that he's targeting Mr. Li Wei? Or should I say that he's targeting Mr. Li Wei? Chapter 1074. He really does pay a lot of attention to Li Wei. Abner nodded in acknowledgement. In fact, if it wasn't for Black Lion and the others intentionally or unintentionally deviating from the main topic in the video, perhaps they wouldn't be discussing the X Factor in the end, But Li Wei's ancestors, Romanus wasn't just talking about today's matter. This includes the segmentation and integration of the formatting field during the live broadcast on the beach in T-City. There was also the live broadcast in Xia City earlier, where he used the dynamo core as an example. Even the term configuration was borrowed from there. Romanus paused a bit as he spoke to this point. It seemed like he was organizing his thoughts, but it also seemed like he was giving Abner space to think. I used to think that Luo Nan was targeting Yen Hong and his son, targeting the archetype format. But at this stage, Luo Nan has no reason to specifically target them. It wouldn't be strange for the father and son to suddenly die one day. Abner chuckled. Let's not talk about the old ones. Yen Yongbua doesn't look like he's going to die easily. Romanus lowered his eyelids again and smiled. Abner agreed with most of his views. At this level, Luo Nan can more or less see through some things. It's not strange for him to target Li Wei. But what about the target? They're very similar. Romanus replied calmly. At least Luo Nan is trying to make everyone think that he's the same as Mr. Li Wei. They're both people who control inconceivable resources and knowledge. They can bring great benefits to everyone, but they can also bring unfathomable disasters at any time. Him and Li Wei? Abner laughed hoarsely. He wants us to think that he's on equal footing with Li Wei? He wants us to give him the same treatment as Li Wei? Maybe. But it's also possible that he's just watching Mr. Li Wei. He has an indifferent attitude towards others. At least today, that's how he behaved. You're saying, he's provoking Mr. Li Wei. He's even waiting for that person to make a move. Abner was still laughing. Li Wei would do something like this. Halfway through his words, he suddenly stopped. That was because Abner recalled that Li Wei had really been active a month ago due to an inexplicable missing uterine fibroids case in Spring City. Speaking of which, the bright red sarcoma in the video was also a tumor. There was no need for Romanus to make things too clear. That was enough. Abner had already understood. If we continue to stand in front, not only will we be used by Wang Yu, but Li Wei might also be happy to have a shield in front? Abner was very direct in front of his confidant. Romanus did not speak again. Abner, on the other hand, frowned. For the first time, his heart wavered. It's okay to help others, but if I can't get a favor and end up in trouble, it's really unnecessary. He pondered for a moment before asking Romanus, "Do you have any suggestions?" At this point, Romanus didn't waste any more time and directly said, "The agenda can be changed, but the meeting cannot be delayed." Yes, this is the main principle. Abner was not prepared to show his face and be treated as a joke. Although Romanus' words were not original, they were exactly what he wanted. And then? You can adjust your center of gravity. Start strong but end weak. Romanus lit up the flexible e-ink screen and swiped on the relevant topic. It just so happens that Lord Mitsuki has an idea. We can take advantage of the situation and let him be the main axis. Abner looked at the inexplicably long topic title. He was still a bit hesitant. His attitude towards Luo Nan seems to lean towards, we can communicate with Lord Mitsuki again and let him be the bridge. Tonight's round-table conference can go off topic, it can be vague, and it can be completely useless. But no matter what, we must make Luo Nan admit to the crime of killing Deputy Secretary General Gong Qi. This was a victory on the political level. Abner's burnt yellow eyebrows raised. He will admit it? Romanus answered with drooping eyes. As long as he wants to maintain his indifferent attitude, why wouldn't he dare admit it? Maybe he even hopes that there will be an explosive point to push him a bit higher. Having said this, he habitually added, "This is my personal opinion. You can use it as a reference, President." Abner was a bit startled, but then he laughed out loud. "Roman, you must have an oriental soul in your shell. Over there, it's not over yet." On the pool deck, Luo Nan's consciousness shifted a bit. It was really that Abner's unfriendly thoughts were far too intense against him. Even though there was a restriction separating them, making it hard to distinguish the details, Luonan was far too close to Abner. His own sensing mode was special, causing him to be more or less disturbed by the warning signs. Of course, Luonan only gave it a glance before quickly withdrawing it. Before the auction and the round table conference began, Luonan had done everything that he could do. Her Majesty Empress Wu had taken a portion of what he hadn't done, and Blood Demon had volunteered to take another portion. Luonan couldn't ask for more. Right now, he felt that it was more worthwhile to focus on what he was better at and polish his current advantages. The clouds in the sky surged violently, rising and falling from time to time. They were actually the majestic body of Mother Micah. They were intimately connected to Luonan's energy, and they were also deeply blended with the power of the soul cloak. Luonan's thoughts were shuttling back and forth within the body of Mother Micah. Everything else was fine. Right now, he was mainly searching the depths of the clouds, searching for the erratic life and death, the flashing magnetism of lightning and fire. During this process, the materials of the School of Fantasy, the confrontation on the front lines of the relay station, and even the short but deep memories of the magnetic mica that he had experienced in his offline tests were supported by the enormous flood of information from Sunwheel Absolute Hell. He had confused the distinction between friend and foe. Several kinds of information were mixed together and compared to the incomplete model of the magnetic mica within the Misty Hall on the mental plane. The reason why Luonan was like this was because he was suddenly stimulated by a flash of inspiration during the discussion with many people. He suddenly discovered that there seemed to be a problem with his previous design train of thought. Or perhaps it could be said that he was limited by his first impression. It must be known that the magnetic mica looked like a vapor cloud, but it was absolutely not a vapor cloud. Its most fundamental ability didn't have much to do with this toy. The vapor cloud could only be considered a kind of external appearance. It was just some kind of carrier. What he had seen and experienced with his own eyes was the mutated form of the magnetic mica that had survived in the evil and poisonous environment of Sin Calamity era. What he researched and studied was the basic nomological state that the School of Fantasy had constructed using configuration and superconfiguration theory before Sin Calamity era. There was already a large difference between the two references. What's more, the original magnetic mica wasn't like this. Chapter 1075. According to the description of the School of Fantasy, the original magneto-optical mica was nothing more than the earliest inhabitants of some planet in the universe. They raised their heads to look at the clouds in the sky and watch them change according to the weather. They believed that the clouds had the ability to show the light, rain, yin and yang. They gathered and accumulated the power of thunder and lightning. They used this to form totem faith and projected their psychic powers. But this sort of thing happened every moment on countless planets with similar atmospheric environments in the boundless universe. It didn't constitute a necessary condition for the formation of a magneto-optical mica. It wasn't even a necessary condition. Generally speaking, the formation of the magneto-optical mica was a sudden change in the accumulation process of a special living system that interweaved with the power of faith. Its own unique fortune allowed it to form an incorporeal, wondrous form similar to magnetism in the long evolutionary process of accepting the power of faith. Within its structure, it even rubbed and operated with all things in the world. Inside, power of faith was the most basic raw material. Sudden changes were the most important opportunities. The special open living system structure was the foundation of the superconfiguration power, the laws of the universe. With the above three conditions working together, it was able to leap from its previous chaotic mode to the height of a fantasy breed. It gradually solidified its structure into shape, manifesting the existence and function of a magnetic-like force. This magnetic-like force was actually the main body of the magneto-optical mica. That's right. Magneto-optical mica. Magneto-optical mica was the main body. It was muscle tissue, nerves, bones, and blood. It was a method to control other targets, and it was an inevitable creation to mend itself. It was highly sensitive to psychic waves emitted on the mental plane of living creatures. It was easy to act on, forming the origin of the soul magnetization ability. It had a deep analysis and segmentation of the structure of all things in the world. It had an almost instinctive rubbing and bonding effect. It further developed the ability to stitch and create things on the basis of its previous foundation. And when the power of magnetization and stitch accumulated layer by layer, it formed a powerful interference and reconstruction effect on the material and mental plane within a certain range of the universe. Even space and time were warped until the barrier of space and time was broken through. The marvelous magnetic force effect allowed it to cross worlds and summon powerful existences, forming the inconceivable ability of the dimensional gate. Of course, according to the legends of the heavenly Yuan Empire, the final form of the magnetic mica jellyfish was also due to some indescribably powerful existence. It was due to the effects of postnatal modification. But this was no longer within the scope of Luo Nan's knowledge. He could only ignore it for now. If Luo Nan's train of thought was correct, then the mica he had created during this period of time couldn't even be considered an embryonic form. It was just a production line for the production of magnetism or soul magnetism. Luo Nan was quite fated with things like production lines. It was his believers and the lives that were bound to the living starry sky that provided him with the incessant soul power. It was the grand production line, a closed system made of his believers and the lives that were bound to the living starry sky. Now, what he had painstakingly built was another magneto-optical production line. However, this line was still incomplete. It would be more appropriate to call it a factory. It could create the most suitable environment for the activation, existence, and effect of soul magnetism. It could even cause some sparks when they collided. But the core output was absolutely not here. It could only come from the imagination and faith of living beings. At the very least, at Luo Nan's current level of construction, it would be better to settle for the next best thing than to forcefully create the first ray of light from nothing. It would be to create an environment of faith that was closer to the very beginning. That was where the petri dish was located at the very beginning. Luo Nan had gone astray from the very beginning when he used the cloud structure to carry out the restoration route. Or perhaps he hadn't gone deep enough. But this couldn't be blamed on him. His most important frame of reference was the relevant theory of the school of fantasy. The theory was vague on this matter. On one hand, it was possible that the researchers of the school wanted to use pure configuration thinking to explain and restore from the very beginning. It was just like the research of bionic robots on Earth. Living beings were clearly placed before their eyes. They had everything, but they just had to use mechanical components and artificial intelligence to realize them. At the very least, they had to replace them to the greatest extent. This was a kind of academic train of thought. They didn't really want to efficiently create fantasy breeds. On the other hand, the topic of faith seemed to be a very sensitive area, whether it was before or after the Calamity era. Luo Nan had once used his own authority to search the external neurons database. It seemed that the research in this area was quite conservative. It was generally secretive. In any case, from what Luo Nan could see, the only thing that could be read out in the open was Lord Zhan He's tome, Configuration, Faith, and the Great Limit, a rational reconstruction of historical evolution from ignorance to dawn, the magneto-optic mica chapter. Thinking too deeply was bound to lead to no result. Luo Nan didn't have the time to tangle with these questions that were destined to remain unanswered in the short term. Plus, he didn't have any academic persistence in this area. His research on the magneto-optical mica was just a method. It was a link in analyzing and reorganizing the structure of space and time. and this sort of analysis and reconstruction was used to deceive people. The reason why things had escalated to this point was because of Luo Nan's habitual train of thought of making a simple problem complicated. In short, right now he just needed the magneto-optical mica to construct a proper silhouette as soon as possible. Who cared if it was a pure configuration, a mutation, or an original ecology? Because of this, Luo Nan really put in effort on Niu Gui after he understood the key point. He no longer used Niu Gui as an experiment and reference to reverse engineer the fantasy breed. Instead, he carefully constructed a temporary petri dish. It just so happened that he could use it. Under Niu Gui's rule, the Great Zhe Order had accumulated a few dozen years of faith. No matter how distorted the process was, the Order still had some accumulation of believers. Even though the projection of faith was mixed and not refined, it was already of much higher quality in modern society when compared to the vast majority of people's thoughts. There was more ample room for adjustment. Luo Nan pondered over how to use his Luo Nan ruler in conjunction with the Wraith sign to realize the distortion of the direction of the power of faith. He didn't need to be long and devout. He just needed to be able to infinitely approach the original environment and form a petri dish. He would cultivate the first magneto-optical mica. This was equivalent to creating an industrial machine. The subsequent evolution could then proceed smoothly and logically. Therefore, Luo Nan's attention was divided into two parts. One part was the structure of the mica in the sky. He continued to observe, comb, and deduce. The other part was the virtual thicket that had just been watered with Niu Gui's flesh and blood. He used the control lines of the mica to slice up layer by layer and reverse permeate. He carried out a thorough understanding of the system of believers and tried to make adjustments. Under the interference of an extraordinary, the winds and clouds changed color in the front and the undercurrents surged in the back. Generally speaking, the clouds in the sky were more eye-catching. On the jadeite light, whether it was an extraordinary, a relatively ordinary ability user, or an ordinary passenger with restless hearts, they all paid attention to it from time to time. As for Niu Gui, who had already been reborn and transformed, he seemed cold and cheerless, but there were actually people watching him. Chapter 1076. Luo Nan's finger, which had been sketching the water vapor diagram, paused for a moment. It was a bit sluggish, but it soon returned to normal. The other party was not purposely making things difficult for him. It was just that the will it sent over was so focused that it almost lost its sense of propriety and interfered with the Ox Ghost card's tree of nothingness. Luo Nan didn't even need to react when the interference occurred. The other side instantly retreated far away. It had a very nervous appearance. Luo Nan laughed in spite of himself. Maybe I should call him a coward. The tree of nothingness was the structural core of a belief system, and Luo Nan had personally reinforced it. It was impossible for it to shatter with a single touch. Was there a need to be so careful? No matter what was said, it was a good thing that Luo Nan had thought things through thoroughly. Luo Nan simply ignored Luo Nan and continued to research and make adjustments. He hoped to be able to implement the changes in his train of thought into practical configuration designs as soon as possible. He wanted to connect the petri dish and the production line. Luo Nan continued to evaluate the possibility of achieving his goal. He knew that it was impossible to nurture a fantasy breed overnight, but as long as the train of thought was clear, the design was right, and the structure was adjusted, the continuous accumulation would eventually succeed. Yep, I have a small goal tonight, to nurture the first ray of light. It's a little difficult, but it's not impossible. The existence of the cowards caused the number of extraordinaries in the vicinity of the jadeite light to rise to double digits, and it was likely to rise even further. The situation became even more complicated, but everyone had a gentleman's agreement in the end. At the same time, Luo Nan simply ignored Her Majesty Empress Wu due to her inexplicable trust in her character. At this point in time, it would be difficult for him to study in peace. Zhang Yingying, who had been helping with the chores before the meeting, walked over quietly. She didn't interrupt his train of thought, but it was obvious that she had something to say. Luonan confirmed the time, but he didn't expect to fish out any more profit from it. He simply waved his hand and erased the structural sketches. He floated lightly to the side of the swimming pool. Zhang Yingying curiously glanced at the center of the pool. That cowardly, tasteless, and boneless cow ghost had suddenly become like this. It was more or less surprising. But soon, she focused her attention on Luonan. She wanted to see if Luonan would have any psychological fluctuations at this stage. But all she saw at this time was Luonan's warm and intimate smiling face. "Sister Yingying, what's the matter?" Zhang Yingying blinked. "We're definitely going to have that roundtable conference tonight." It was basically confirmed. There probably wouldn't be any changes. The boss asked me to pass the agenda to you. Basic? Roughly? Luonan looked at Zhang Yingying's projection interface, looking at the formal agenda list. The organizer of the conference, the participants, the format of the conference, and so on were clearly written on it. It was almost completely within his expectations. The only variables left were the meeting time and agenda. The time is set for the East and West Districts 2200 hours tonight. That was 2 hours after the auction started. If there were no accidents, the auction should have ended by then. It was relatively reasonable. As for the agenda, at this time, Luonan had already read out the important parts in a low voice. Continue the matters related to the identification meeting. Headquarters personnel adjustments after the death of Deputy Secretary General Gong Qi. And the Lord of the Secret Contract. The topic of the agenda was a bit long, so Luonan skipped it. It looks rather ordinary. Very vague, right? Zhang Yingying smiled. Boss said that even though it's boring, it might be a good sign for you. Luonan didn't care. Don't tell me we have to count on that side? Being timid is better than being stubborn. Boss has already received more accurate information. Due to your super high-profile performance these past few days, their attitude has clearly softened. Someone has already sent a message to boss, saying that everyone needs to communicate and discuss. I'm afraid that the next 3 hours will be even more exciting than the auction. Blood Demon's cackling laughter interrupted Zhang Yingying's words. Then, he appeared on the deck. Not only did they send a message to Her Majesty Empress Wu, they also think quite highly of me. I came here this time to shoulder the heavy responsibility of a lobbyist. A lobbyist? Blood Demon kept Luonan in suspense. It's about time. Let's go directly to the venue. Tonight isn't just for the auction. It's true that the current banquet is very boring, but the following free trade fair is still a bit interesting. I remember you saying that you wanted to experience the current state of development in distortion technology? This is a good opportunity. Luonan had indeed said something similar when they were chatting before. In any case, he didn't expect to be able to produce a complete version of a magneto-optical mica in the half an hour before the auction. He nodded indifferently. We still need to go to Area C, right? Let's go. You don't know how hard it is for some people to wait right now. Blood Demon simply came over. You pulled on her flip-flop. She took the lead and walked in front. Soon, a group of people entered the ship's hold. The elevator hall was right in front of them. Luonan actually had something he wanted to ask. About High Lord Mitsuki's topic. In the end, Mr. Luonan, I'm very sorry to disturb you. Huh? The source of the voice came from a group of people who had been waiting in the elevator hall for a long time. To be more precise, it came from the formally dressed woman at the very front. Her clothes were formal, but one could feel an outstanding sense of design at a glance. Her makeup was exquisite, and it was hard to tell her age. But in the end, she was an outstanding beauty. Moreover, she had quite the status. Even though she held a folder in her hand, she didn't look like a secretary. However, When Luonan cast his gaze over, this formally dressed woman immediately made a 90-degree bow. There were always 6 or 7 people behind her, and they all bowed at the same time. Their posture was quite intimidating. Luonan raised an eyebrow. "You guys? Master Luonan, please accept our apologies." Luonan had only heard of such a Chunibu form of address in Snake Tongue, back in Ban City. "Yep, that's the smell." Before Luonan could respond, Blood Demon and Zhang Yingying glanced at each other. They both had their own guesses. Zhang Yingying moved closer to Luonan. She was just about to whisper the identities of these people when she never expected Luonan to walk a step ahead of her. Luonan didn't say anything. He let them maintain their 90-degree bows. He just walked to the front of the formally dressed woman at the very front and extended his hand. Due to the woman's posture and angle, it looked as if he was reaching directly into the woman's lapel. Blood Demon watched with interest. Zhang Yingying's eyebrows jumped up, but she didn't say anything in the end. As for Luonan, he just took the folder from the woman's arm. He also took off a corsage-like ornament from her chest in passing. He wasn't in a rush to look at the contents of the folder. He just turned the corsage slightly to an angle and looked at the rather exquisite design engraved on it. "This mountain. Toyama Auction House." Luonan wasn't surprised in the slightest. He flipped open the folder and looked at the documents inside. This was the original copy of the commission auction contract. There was no need to mention the content. When he flipped to the end, an unfamiliar name was signed on the client's position. But it was very interesting. There was a note in parentheses at the end, Horn Demon. Chapter 1077. This is the document for the equipment entrusted to you by the Horn Demon for the auction. Luonan spent a few words to state the facts he saw. Then he asked, "What about you guys? What do you plan on doing now?" "Obviously, we're here to beg for mercy." Blood Demon rushed to answer on behalf of the other side. But then he began to speak in a strange tone. "This signal has finally been transmitted from the central nervous system to the nerve endings. The problem is, if your fingers are burned, why are you showing your face?" At this time, the woman in formal attire finally got the chance to speak. She still maintained her bent posture, but she was able to express herself quickly and clearly. "Lord Luonan, please believe in our sincerity. We will let this group of auction items with serious flaws enter the withdrawal process." As she spoke, her back suddenly sank slightly. It was Luonan placing the folder and the corsage on her smooth back. Then he turned around and left. This woman in formal attire was proficient in business etiquette. Even though she had placed herself in a lowly position, she was still able to maintain her graceful bearing. But Luonan's move could not be resolved by any etiquette. Her entire body froze in place. The others waited for Luonan and the other two to enter the elevator before they dared to move. They helped take the folder off her back. "Executive Manager Kahara, are you okay?" The mess in the elevator was not worth mentioning. In the elevator car, Blood Demon praised Luonan's actions. "Beautifully done. Don't look at how they were just short of sitting down." In fact, this was the most insincere expression. Kenta Toyama wasn't so old that he couldn't move. He just randomly sent a person over to talk about a solution. In the end, he just wanted to play a trick here. The only thing that needed to be thought about was the quality of the person chosen. That person should be your type, right? Push her out. Maybe your heart will soften and you'll agree? Luonan's expression did not change. Zhang Yingying rolled her eyes. She was still a bit curious. "What are you thinking by doing this? And the auction item? You need a plan to deal with it, right?" "I didn't think too much about it. I just felt that any enterprise in Osaka City would certainly have a connection with the Amaterasu Order. They don't dare to offend me, but do they dare to offend the Church of True God?" Luonan clearly didn't want to chat on this topic. He turned to ask Blood Demon, "Who are you lobbying for?" An old man with even less sincerity than Kenta Toyama. The only thing better than him is probably on this ship. Blood Demon grinned. Maybe he's paying attention to you right now. What's his reaction? Who? Zhang Yingying blinked. It's the one you scolded during the appraisal meeting. Zhang Yingying's eyelids twitched, and she immediately stopped talking. Without his boss by his side, it was better to keep a low profile. Luo Nan's thoughts turned for a bit, and he confirmed his target. Abner. Are you a little surprised? He's alright. Luo Nan spoke the truth. He didn't seem to have a particularly tough feeling when I saw him come over today. I didn't pay much attention, so I don't know if that's what you mean. The Blood Demon burst into laughter. That's exactly what I meant. Over the years, his beard became more and more yellow, and his intestines became more and more twisted. To the side, Zhang Yingying couldn't help but ask, then the matter of him asking you to be a lobbyist, and the matter of him going through the boss, should be the same thing. If it's related to Gong Qi's death and the issue of claiming responsibility, then that should be the case. I don't think they have any other tricks up their sleeves. Death. Luo Nan didn't understand for a moment. They're both violent death. A passionate armed melee and a deliberate murder aren't the same thing, right? The Blood Demon winked at Luo Nan. In any case, the dead can't live. In the end, what's going on, whether the responsibility is big or small, will be determined by the living. Of course, the other side also said that claiming responsibility is the basic premise. Luo Nan thought for a bit, but he didn't understand. He didn't understand. What was the point of beating around the bush? This design depends on the level of subsequent operations. To put it bluntly, Yellowbeard is stalling for time. He wants to drag the conflict to the back. He even wants to do a big shift. He already doesn't have the confidence to settle things at the Round Table Conference. So before he thinks about victory, he thinks about defeat. He's afraid of scraping that old face of his. The Blood Demon had clearly said that Abner might have pricked up his ears to listen in, but no one was as excessive as him. Right now, at least half of Abner lives by relying on his face. He was much more dazzling than he is now when he ascended to the position in the early days. He truly relied on his fists to beat people to death. The problem is that he's gotten used to being a consul these past few years. In the circle, he can rely on his old face to succeed in every endeavor. He's accomplished in the art of face, so he's ashamed to use his fists. Luo Nan went, oh. It seemed that he understood, but he didn't say anything else. Just like this, they exited the elevator and walked a few dozen steps through a tunnel with extremely high privileges and restrictions. Hey, do you agree or not? Or are you saying that you want to discuss this with the martial monarch? This isn't urgent, right? Of course we're not in a hurry. But it's hard to say for Abner. Fine. Let's leave him hanging first. The Blood Demon really didn't have the professional ethics of a lobbyist. He chuckled and tossed this matter to the side. At this time, Luo Nan took the initiative to talk to him. Is the topic of the secret contract the one you guys want to backdoor with? How about it? Are you interested? I know this topic is your type. I'm a bit interested. Do you have detailed information? It's on the agenda. Of course there's information. The Blood Demon knew of Luo Nan's special state, so there was no need to share the documents. He snapped his fingers and shared his virtual interface, letting Luo Nan conduct a round of overview. Actually, I should have given it to you earlier. What if I agreed to cooperate with you guys? It's not too late now. Not only do we need staunch allies on this issue, we also need universal understanding and sympathy. Bad choice of words. Luo Nan spoke to the Blood Demon on and off. At the same time, he quickly skimmed through the relevant contents of the topic material and clarified the relevant topic. Discussing the X factor. I remember you guys saying earlier that this sort of basic level stuff isn't very popular these past few years. But it can still attract people's attention. It's a very good entry point. At least that's how I understand it. That's truly a pity. Huh! I'm saying that it's too much of a pity not to delve into the discussion. Luo Nan's attitude was quite sincere. On the topic material provided by the secret contract High Lord, Luo Nan raised an old but classic proposition. X, the unknown core element that allowed supernatural powers to appear on Earth, the core element that allowed humans to carry out highly efficient self-evolution. In the end, what is it? And how should we go about discovering it? Is it a simple invasion of mutated genes? Is there an additional special composition in the Earth's atmosphere? Or is there a change in the operating rules of a more fundamental existence of spacetime? Over the past few decades, this sort of research in the inner world had risen and fallen, never ceasing. Practically all possibilities in the current cognitive domain had been exhausted. Right now, the secret contract High Lord did not provide a completely new research perspective from the perspective of the material. However, he made an unprecedented in-depth exploration from one of the perspectives, the observation abyssal region. Chapter 1078. The division of the mental plane of the inner world was still in the age of chaos. Even the concept of 3 layers, 1 area, and 1 domain did not exist. The exploration, observation, and research of the abyss sector had already begun. Although the theory could not keep up, it was useful. As long as one could actually touch that side, resist the violent turbulence, and form an effective interference structure, one would be able to use an unimaginable power. One could use it to attack and cultivate, pulling one's level away from others in an instant. In comparison, the polar domain, which seemed to be higher level and more transcendent, was a notch lower in practicality. Therefore, for a long time, including now, the inner world's development of applied techniques aimed at the abyss sector far surpassed the relevant basic research. In the past few decades, it was not that no one suspected that the existence of the abyss sector and even the polar domain was the X factor that turned supernatural power from legend into reality. However, no one was able to find the corresponding evidence. Even now, no one was able to figure it out. Did they always exist? Or did they suddenly appear at some point in time and change the course of the world? Luo Nan quickly flipped through Lord Secretdeed's discussion materials. He did not find any words or sentences that could determine the nature of the abyss sector. Clearly, this research had not touched upon the essence of the abyss sector. As for whether or not there was a breakthrough, it was up to the individual to decide. What could be confirmed was that Lord Secretdeed's observation work was quite solid. The observation points were spread all over the world. The basic data was detailed down to the day, and the corresponding special events were accurate down to the minute and second. A single glance was enough to tell that this was a research team of considerable scale and an astronomical amount of investment. This material attempted to speak through data, but due to the unfathomable nature of the abyss sector for the vast majority of people, too many abstract mathematical models were used. They were extremely profound. This was not Luo Nan's domain of expertise. It was quite difficult to restore it to the configuration thinking he was more accustomed to. But Luo Nan's interest did not diminish. I want to take a closer look. Luo Nan decided to search and compare this report with the external neurons database. Perhaps it would give him a whole new perspective. In fact, there were already a few concepts in the material. They were more sensitive to him, and they were quite enlightening. Reality might also bring trouble. Luo Nan shot a glance at Blood Demon. No wonder they took the initiative to seek a collaboration. In order to give you a heads up? Blood Demon grinned. Luo Nan didn't delve too deeply into this matter. She had researched these sensitive issues in passing over a long period of observation. She had taken a very righteous stance in the beginning. Even if he knew that they must have some ulterior motive for choosing such a critical juncture, he couldn't say anything. In fact, judging from the Blood Demon's attitude, if he asked a few more questions, he might be able to dig something out. But since he had already rejected the suggestion of a deeper cooperation, there was no point in asking further. In any case, he himself was a point that could not be avoided. Since he was already in the whirlpool, why would he be afraid of getting wet? Needless to say, Luo Nan still needed these things for the pressing matter at hand. At this time, the three of them had already returned to the exhibition hall in Area C and entered the venue for the night. Strictly speaking, ever since the Jade Light left Band City, a trade fair with the theme of distortion had already begun. In this place, the prey and collections of individuals, the raw materials and technologies for production, and even the intangible but extremely important market and connections were all being communicated and traded inside and outside the hall. Now, the climax of the artificially designed event had arrived. When he re-entered the venue, most of the booths had been removed, but the exhibition did not stop. Instead, it changed from a general display to a demonstration of fine products and a small-scale auction to warm up the audience. The entire Area C became clamorous, but under the professional guidance of the conference staff, it appeared hot but not impatient. It was noisy but not chaotic. Yes, this had a lot to do with the quality of the people present. Luo Nan confirmed that there were many professionals in the field of distortion aside from the buyers who held large sums of money in their hands. They were either demonstrators, appraisers, or strategists. They clashed and cooperated with each other, clashing with sparks of thought and wisdom. This was very much in line with the design of a technology and equipment trade fair and demonstration. He walked and stopped along the way, occasionally concentrating on some of the project demonstrations and materials. He was completely unworried about the auction that had already begun. Gradually, Luo Nan gained a basic understanding of the most advanced distortion technology of the day. He could confirm that this trade fair was indeed selling goods. This kind of atmosphere design is quite good. She's pretty good. Luo Nan made a casual evaluation. Wang Yu is very good at utilizing the strong points of professionals. Bai Xinyan had probably been waiting here for a long time. She magically popped out from the crowd and inserted herself between Luo Nan and Zhang Yingying. She held onto the crook of their arms in an intimate manner. She looked even more unbridled than she had been in the afternoon. Clearly, this was due to Zhang Yingying's presence. Zhang Yingying, who had instantly become a shield, could not help but roll her eyes. If you continue to court death, no one will be able to protect you. Apologies. The demonstration project died prematurely, and I was sold out by my boyfriend. I was carefree, so I drank a few more cups at the party. I was a bit excited. Don't mind me. Bai Xinyan actually blew on Luo Nan's face as she spoke. Sure enough, there was a bit of the smell of alcohol, and it carried an indescribable fragrance. It wasn't unpleasant. Right now, she was no longer wearing the white coat of a researcher. Instead, she wore a plain white evening gown. She lightly brushed off her makeup, and because she was slightly drunk, she had an unbridled and innocent appearance. She looked like a white lotus flower. Luo Nan's expression didn't change. His gaze turned to Zhang Yingying. Zhang Yingying clasped her hands together with difficulty and made a please gesture. Her face was full of distress. Let's do this for now. Whether it was now, the auction, or the follow-up round-table conference, having a tool by one's side would always give them a bit more leeway for change. Luo Nan was disinclined to say anything more, but Blood Demon suddenly became interested. Hey, little white flower. You said that your demonstration project is finished. Doesn't that mean you're missing a finale? The auction house is quite embarrassed, right? Little White Flower, Bai Xinyan didn't mind this temporary nickname at all. She extended her neck and stuck her cheek out from the side of Luo Nan's head. She chuckled as she continued Blood Demon's words. Exactly. Right now the auction house is a mess, it's too miserable. Blood Demon had an expression of bemoaning the state of the universe and pitying the fate of mankind. He turned to look at Luo Nan. If it's said that the one who started the trouble needs to untie it, Shouldn't we take some responsibility for the other side and support them? That's what I'm thinking. Let's give him a show. Of course, I'll speak the truth first. It's also to create a gimmick for the revised card deck that I'm about to publish. First, hand in 1 or 2 pieces of homework. Give me an Extraordinary's portrait card. We'll directly put it up for auction. Chapter 1079. Luonan felt baffled by Blood Demon's sudden idea. Most of the people at the auction are rich and powerful. They have nothing to do with the inner world. Who would care about this? Blood Demon saw that Luonan didn't immediately refuse. Instead, Blood Demon considered the problem of the audience for him. He immediately knew that there was a way. He grinned and wagged his finger. No. Quite a few of them are from the same circle. They're all in the ruling circle. It's just that they use money and power while we use our fists. Blood Demon extended his 5 fingers. He clenched and released them. Plus, as long as you're certain that the card you make has the same effect as before. TSK. Don't play dumb. I'm talking about the move that summons Ox Demon. You're counting on those people to activate and borrow the extraordinary power of the card. Why? Do you rely on burning money? The Blood Demon blinked. You mean to say that it was indeed effective? Can it be used once, or can it be used multiple times? How would I know? It's just that the painting material given by High Lord's secret deed is good. Stop flattering each other. It's not like I didn't ask about it. Blood Demon clapped his hands. It doesn't matter if it can be used once or multiple times. It doesn't matter if it's practical or not for those people. It's a gimmick. With this move, this old man who doesn't even have the strength to truss a chicken is the same as inviting a door god home. A living door god. How interesting. Generally speaking, door gods have all died before. Blood Demon acted as if he didn't hear these words. He began to plan the details in high spirit. With how chaotic the auction is right now, it doesn't take much to get through the joints and add an impromptu program. As for the candidates, it's a bit troublesome. Brother, your knowledge isn't enough. Since it was a portrait, they could only choose the ones Luonan had seen before. There were nearly 100 extraordinaries in the entire world. There were only a dozen or so of these. There were also some that they couldn't court death no matter what. For example, Her Majesty Empress Wu, who was waiting for them in the private room of the auction site. Of course, since Blood Demon took the initiative to bring it up, he certainly had a plan in mind. I have a good candidate on my side. He has strength, prestige, and style. He doesn't have too high of a relationship with everyone. Generally speaking, the awkward situation of a door god won't occur. Plus, he's someone you've seen before. The vast majority of people have never seen before. Hearing Blood Demon lay out a long list, Zhang Yingying couldn't help but be curious. Are there such people among the extraordinaries? Who is it? The Snow Demon circled the air with her arms to show that it was huge. Then she said, Poseidon. Poseidon? Luonan didn't react for a moment. Diamond? Zhang Yingying was confused. Who's with that guy? She suddenly went silent in the latter half of the conversation. Blood Demon used a finger to tap her, praising her for having a lively brain. He turned to face Luonan with an expression of exasperation that Luonan didn't live up to his expectations. Didn't you just fight it yesterday? No matter what, they should know each other very well, right? No one had seen that fellow before, but whether it was in the inner world or the secular world, his name was extremely resounding. Once he appeared in the world, there was no doubt that he would explode. It's still the image first. Before he finished speaking, Shui Yao suddenly froze, and his footsteps slowed down. Luonan and the others overtook them. Luonan curled his lips. Zhang Yingying and Bai Xinyan didn't feel anything at this moment. In fact, the vast majority of the people present were completely unaware that an enormous tsunami had suddenly rolled over them on a special plane that was very close to them. Since the source of the power was too high, the distance between it and the material plane was pulled apart. But in the end, there was still contact, and the point of contact was Shui Yao. Caught off guard, Shui Yao's tyrannical fleshly body, an extraordinary, was frozen on the spot. It wasn't that he couldn't move, but the moment he moved, the balance would be broken. This place would immediately become the center of a direct collision between the two extraordinary powers. The aftermath of the collision was enough to turn the trading center into a slaughterhouse. Luo Nan hadn't seen this sort of control of power that was on the verge of breaking, where a single strand of force fell to the ground. But it really did come from the coward. To be more precise, it came from the threat of Poseidon. It hated Shui Yao to the core. Perhaps this was the difference between a long distance and a short distance? Luo Nan was also affected by the aftermath. It was probably a warning. After all, he was the one who was most likely to expose his true identity. Luo Nan didn't mind. He wasn't afraid yesterday, so what was there to be afraid now? It was just that there was no need. He turned to look at Shui Yao and spoke in a leisurely manner. So you don't know that that person has always attached great importance to his image? Shui Yao grimaced in pain. Luo Nan wasn't particularly surprised by the fact that the coward was Poseidon. He wasn't a complete idiot. He had encountered such a powerful mutant in the South Pacific Ocean, and he had more or less seen some details about it. As long as he did a bit of homework, he would be able to lock his suspicions onto a relatively small range. He already had a high degree of suspicion that the coward was Poseidon. Now that he had confirmed it, it didn't matter. Well, it seemed like it could be a bit useful. Luo Nan's train of thought suddenly expanded. Speaking of which, ever since he began perfecting the magneto-optical mica production line, he had always felt that Ox Ghost's petri dish was too small. Its efficiency was a bit low. The system of the blood flame order could be used, but it wasn't compatible. Luo Nan himself had his so-called believers. His closed system appeared to be quite large. However, there were only 2 or 3 genuine believers. The others were just carriers of thoughts that had been invaded by the altar's spiderweb or distorted by Luo Nanchi. They were all in a muddle-headed state. They didn't possess true faith. As for this person, Meng Chong had said that Poseidon's extraordinary power had given birth to a few belief systems in many ocean cities. Even though they were scattered and unsystematic, when put together, their scale was much larger than Ox Ghost's potted small order. And the direction of this type of belief was often highly related to the ocean, clouds, storms, lightning, and other imagery. If only he could borrow it. Cough. This idea was quite far off. There were quite a few technical problems. Even if he could use it, it wouldn't be tonight. It would be in the future. However, Luo Nan had another idea that was highly related to Poseidon. He continued to chat with Shui Yao. I heard Black Lion say that in this world, only Poseidon can enter the deep blue world without using any man-made tools? Shui Yao had been given a solid warning, but he couldn't do anything to Poseidon. He felt sullen and followed Luo Nan with a gloomy face. Shui Yao responded in a bad mood. You want him to take you there? How? Swallow you into his stomach and spit you out when we get there? The difficulty might be a bit high. Luo Nan believed that the highly sensitive Poseidon was able to perceive the conversation that involved Poseidon. However, Poseidon maintained his silence. Was it disdain, or was it afraid of something? Perhaps they could talk about this later. The twists and turns caused by the hole in Shui Yao's brain didn't cause any substantial effects in the end. Aside from Luo Nan, the group of people knew the layout of the venue like the back of their hand. They arrived at the auction venue without a hitch. Luo Nan didn't know how the damage to the original booth would affect the layout of the auction venue. He didn't care about this. He would just go wherever Her Majesty Empress Wu led him. The one who opened the door was Meng Chong. This was the chief warrior of the Blood Flame Order. He had originally followed Luo Nan out to sea, but now he had become Her Majesty Empress Wu's bodyguard. Meng Chong let out a sigh of relief when he saw Luo Nan. He bowed in greeting. "Mr. Luo, Her Majesty Empress Wu has arrived." At this time, the sound of a hammer falling could be clearly seen from the large screen at the front of the room. "It's already begun? Think about how many demonstrations you've seen on the way here." Zhang Yingying was the first to walk past him and enter the room. She shouted at Her Majesty Empress Wu, who was sitting on the sofa. "Boss, you've finally brought them over." Her Majesty Empress Wu grunted in response to Zhang Yingying's coquettish behavior. Her long black hair was tied up casually, resting on her chest. Her body leaned against the armrest of the sofa, and she slowly flipped through the pages of a book. She didn't even raise her head. She lacked interest in the auction that had already begun. As for the drunk by Xinyan, she called out "boss" from a distance. Then she walked on her tiptoes and sat on the other end of the sofa. She propped her arms up, raised her head, and breathed heavily. Her Majesty Empress Wu didn't care. As for Luo Nan and Shui Yao, she simply pretended that they didn't exist. It seemed that nothing was more interesting than the Buddhist scripture in her hand. Luo Nan's gaze quickly swept over the three women in the room. He had questions in his mind, but there was no need to get answers on the spot. In the end, he still focused on the large screen at the front of the room. Well, he wasn't just relying on his eyes to see. The auction had already begun, but there were problems with the venue, the auction items, the finale program, and even the mastermind behind the scenes. It would be strange if this event could be held well. Luo Nan was at least 20 minutes late, but the atmosphere in the venue was still chaotic. Whether it was in the Great Hall or in the rooms scattered everywhere, practically no one was able to smoothly enter a state of mind. Many people were the sources of gossip, and at the same time, they were broadcasting towers. All sorts of information and emotions flowed within the venue and brewed on the spot. Blood Demon stood shoulder to shoulder with Luo Nan. He adjusted his state of mind from the small twists and turns just now, and he revealed a smile once more. "What do you think? You single-handedly created this scene. Don't you feel a sense of accomplishment? I'm not familiar with them, and I'm basically unrelated to them. I don't feel a fucking sense of accomplishment. But you need to know that the people here, as well as the people who are paying attention to this place through remote signals, can mobilize wealth and power. They can practically decide the life and death of a third of the people on Earth." "Remote? Does the auction allow telephone bidding?" Blood Demon couldn't get Luo Nan's focus. He was stunned for a moment before responding. "It's hard to say for collectibles. After all, they're similar to works of art. The tempo is always fast. But there are some assets and technical auction items that are more suitable. That's quite ideal. Have you thought about which one to choose?" Luo Nan blinked his eyes, his face pure. "Didn't you say you wanted to add a program, stir up some gimmicks, and do some operations for the Card Group magazine? You want me to provide cards? I just had a good idea." Blood Demon showed a rare hesitation. "This doesn't feel right." Luo Nan didn't care about Blood Demon's thoughts. He continued speaking. "Remember that you want to release a commemorative copy? Since you want a door god, some options are very appropriate. Which one do you choose? Or do you want both?" Chapter 1080. Kawahara Machiko walked through the trading floor expressionlessly. Her wristwatch vibrated on her slender wrist, and she pressed the stop button. This action had been repeated many times. "Manager Kawahara." The subordinate behind her couldn't help but remind her because the call was directed to him. "It's a call from the vice president. He wants you to pick up the phone." "Hang up." "Huh!" "Hang up," Kawahara Machiko repeated. This was tantamount to giving a footnote to her own choice. She had been sent to the jadeite light from a faraway place to be used as a sacrificial pawn. The higher-ups of the auction house and the shareholders of a higher level did not think that they could rely on words and so-called sincerity to make the youngest extraordinary, who was showing off her sharpness by the day, turn a mess into a friend. What's more, sincerity was nothing more than sincerity. No one was willing to raise the price and throw themselves into the abyss of hatred that they were destined to receive no return. It was even more impossible for this to affect the Amaterasu Order's impression of their god. This was just a routine procedure. Kawahara Machiko had been sent here merely because she possessed more reasons to be dug out. 1. She was a rare female among the higher-up. 2. She was quite beautiful, and she might conform to Luo Nan's legendary aesthetic standards. 3. She once had some so-called friendship with the woman Luo Nan met in Osaka City, Kitayama Uehui. Actually, they had only met a few times in business settings. These so-called reasons had all turned into dog's hit after Kawahara Machiko and Kitayama Uehui failed to contact each other. Instead of thinking about these *T reasons and considering the consequences that couldn't possibly be worse, she might as well take another gamble. She had to think about the consequences that couldn't possibly be worse. Up ahead, Luo Nan's room was already in sight. "Manager, the auction has already begun," the subordinate reminded with all his might, hoping that his superior would understand that meeting with a major client at this time was hard to escape suspicion. Kawahara Machiko stopped walking. She turned to look at her subordinates, who were equally unlucky. "Auction? Everyone, we have staked our careers to come here. What does this have to do with the auction? If we don't have this awareness when we return..." "No, when we return, there will be no return to speak of." Just as her subordinates' faces turned red or pale, Kawahara Machiko once again felt the vibration of her wrist, but this time, the source of the information given by the personal intelligence was completely different. She shuddered and answered the call instantly. A frivolous male voice came from the other side. "Beauty manager, it seems that your efforts have paid off. Before our Mr. Luo changes his tenderness towards the fairer sex, aren't you going to come over and deepen it?" Kawahara Machiko clenched her fists tightly, but she replied in a soft and clear tone, "Hey, sorry to keep you waiting. I'll be right there." 5 seconds later, Kawahara Machiko calmed down and pressed the doorbell of the private room. And the time she waited was 4 to 5 times longer than the time it took to arrive after the call ended. The fully exposed camera outside the door seemed to be conducting a cold and silent inspection. During this time, Kawahara Machiko and her subordinates all maintained a slightly forward and respectful posture, standing solemnly in absolute silence. Finally, the door to the private room opened. Kawahara Machiko thought that she would encounter an even harsher gaze of inspection, but she didn't. It looked like no one in the private room was paying special attention to her. The inspection just now was more like a simple and unintentional neglect, a play directed by herself in her mind. The attention of the vast majority of the people here was focused on her target of public relations today, Luo Nan's body. They watched him use his finger as a pen and the water vapor as ink to draw diagrams high in the air. Some people clicked their tongues, some people hissed, and some people simply moaned. "You think the matter isn't big enough?" The one moaning and complaining was the man who had called her over with a frivolous tone. The internal intelligence of the auction house listed him as one of the most terrifying, extraordinary, blood demon. The tone was one thing, but the excitement on his face was the real deal. Kawahara Machiko went to look at the outline of the water vapor imprints, but she came at the wrong time. Luo Nan had just finished his draft. He waved his hand and erased the water vapor diagram. The youngest extraordinary in the world turned her face to face Blood Demon and said, "You said it before. I have to take the initiative. I have to press forward. I have to arrange a position forward. Since they're retreating, I'm going to advance. I'm going to advance until they have nowhere to retreat." Sure enough, his drive was unparalleled. Kawahara Machiko, who had just entered, made an immediate evaluation in her mind. She combined it with the relevant intelligence and secretly pondered how she should respond appropriately when it came time to deepen things. Blood Demon raised an eyebrow. Even a rabbit will bite when it's cornered. Aren't you worried? I'm saying that headquarters' arms are quite long. If you really piss them off, they won't be able to hit you on the ship, but they'll be able to do it over at Osaka City. That will depend on whether or not the true God and the Pope are willing to give up their own training grounds and abdicate their positions to President Abner. I have a premonition that they might not be willing. Blood Demon was very sharp. What did you discover this time? That cow demon? Luonan's mood was quite relaxed. He pursed his lips in the direction of Kawahara Machiko and casually joked, "Are you preparing to silence her next?" Saying that you have tender and protective feelings for the fairer sex isn't wrong in the slightest. Kawahara Machiko could only pretend that she was deaf after being treated as a target of ridicule. Her eyes were focused on her nose was focused on her mouth, and her mouth was focused on her heart. She stood still like a statue, not adding any variables to the conversation between the two big shot. Sure enough, Luonan was the first to return to the main topic. I just feel that Lord's secret contract looks like he's going to make a big deal out of it. With him backing me from the back, I'm emboldened. Hey, you need to know that his agenda is at the back. Haven't I seen the materials already? I'll be careful not to stray off topic. Besides, I might even be able to help out. Blood Demon was a bit startled. He looked at Luonan, and Luonan responded with a smile. For a time, Blood Demon was actually struck speechless by Luonan's strong will to forge ahead. Luckily, he soon cackled loudly. Young people learn things quickly. He then turned to Her Majesty Empress Wu. Don't you think that there's no need for you to make this trip? Her Majesty Empress Wu didn't even raise her head. Her fingertips slowly flipped a page. Do you want to make a bet? No, I don't want to raise a flag. Blood Demon tactfully backed down. By this time, Luonan had already called over Kawahara Machiko to make the relevant arrangements. Machiko forced herself to remain calm, but she had a rather resolute attitude. It actually saved him quite a bit of effort. That's about it. There shouldn't be any problems, right? Of course there were problems, but Kawahara Machiko wouldn't reveal any awkward emotions in front of Luonan. She bowed once more. It was as if everything was an established procedure, a matter of course. Then, please make your preparations, Mr. Luo. We will notify you 5 minutes in advance. Okay. Luonan's answer was simple. Kawahara Machiko took a shallow breath. She maintained her bowed posture as she backed out of the door. When the door to the room closed, she turned to face her subordinates outside. Her eyes were completely filled with a sharp, cold, and hard light. From now on, it will be time to test everyone's resolve. What sort of resolve? Kawahara Machiko didn't give a clear answer, but at this time, many people naturally came to a realization. It was loyalty, and it wasn't necessarily towards the auction house. It was towards Executive Kawahara himself. This was a bit more subtle. In any case, Executive Kawahara, who had received some sort of order from within the room, seemed to be the one who truly held a resolve to act. Chapter 1081. The auction continued to proceed in a chaotic and subtle state. All sorts of useful and useless items were auctioned off, but most of them had a certain commemorative value. However, regardless of whether it was the auctioneer or the bidders, they were all a bit absent-minded. So much so that the heat couldn't be stirred up. The rate of unauctioned items was clearly higher than normal. Under this sort of atmosphere, it was quite normal for 1 or 2 unauctioned items to be auctioned off. Kenta Toyama is probably beating his chest and stamping his feet. They gave you such a good excuse in vain. They just think so. Bai Xinyan rested her chin on Zhang Yingying's shoulder and laughed softly. Someone has his face raised to the sky. Maybe he only has eyes for the sky. No, he only has eyes for the sea of stars. Don't pretend to be crazy under the influence of alcohol, Zhang Yingying warned her, but Bai Xinyan kissed her on the cheek. The two immediately became a ball. Luonan ignored the small chaos in the room. he continued to prepare in an orderly manner. He asked Blood Demon to introduce a few more details about the painting materials he was going to use. In other words, the secret deed and the special stylus. It looked like he really was going to paint. The problem was, he only saw the preparation. He didn't see the painting. There was a knock on the door to the room at this time. Koahara Machiko personally came over to inform him, "Mr. Luo, it's almost time." "Oh, how do I get there?" "Please follow me." Blood Demon bared his teeth. Rather than saying he was nervous and worried, it would be better to say that he was highly excited. Hey, are you really going to do it here? Don't say I didn't tell you. Impromptu speeches, compositions, and the like might not be taken care of. Many people will be able to use it against you. Luonan grunted. If water really doesn't get in, then wouldn't many people be disappointed and in despair? How are we going to talk about the follow-up? Zhang Yingying, who was still being strangled by Sinyan, grew more and more bewildered. Is this for real? Sinyan responded by her ear. It's clearly a fake body. But his mind is definitely his own. Are you scared? Blood Demon raised his eyebrows. He didn't give up on his earlier thoughts. He made one last effort. Are you really not going to find a few helpers who can help you fill in the gaps? Luonan had already turned around and walked outside. I have to get a feel of things first. Don't they all say, know yourself and know your enemy? Also, I have to give everyone a chance to get to know me and understand me. TSK. Blood Demon watched as Luonan left the room. He and Her Majesty Empress Wu were deeply moved. You suddenly felt your blood run cold, didn't you? I didn't. That's because Your Majesty has a big heart. Her Majesty Empress Wu laughed soundlessly. She explained a bit more, which was rare for her. He just has a sharp gaze and can see through people's hearts. Then, he does what he can to make people feel uncomfortable. From the looks of it, he's still at the stage where he's just acting on his own whims. Even if he's thinking about it, it's not thorough. It's just that you guys can't understand the boundaries of his thoughts, so you're just scaring yourselves. Your Majesty, is that what you think? The Blood Demon immediately came over. Since we're talking about borders, where's our little brother's border? Why don't we compare? The martial emperor neither agreed nor disagreed. The Blood Demon rolled his eyes and said with a smile, Then I'll go first. My keyword is cloak. As he spat out these words, the Blood Demon smiled, but he stared closely at Her Majesty Empress Wu's expression. The problem was that the latter was still too lazy to even lift his eyelids and said, Great minds think alike. Zhang Yingying, who was at the side, could see through the Blood Demon's overly impatient thoughts. She curled her lips but soon called out, It's on stage, it's on stage. Before she spoke, the ring screen in the private room had already begun to display a different image. The auctioneer on the stage had just ended an unsuccessful round of auctions. Not only was his mouth parched, but his face and hair were also covered in a layer of fine sweat. This was all because of the chaos caused by the situation that had gotten out of control. It must be said that he was also one of the few senior figures in the industry, but this was the first time he had encountered a situation where the entire venue and several hundred people were not in the right state. It was also at this moment that an order from above came through the earpiece. It was absurd and unquestionable. The auctioneer's mind was blank. He subconsciously turned his face to look at the side of the stage. Just at this moment, the light on and below the stage changed. The light on the auction stage was dim, but below the stage, there was a new area where the light was focused. There, a youth dressed in ordinary clothes, but his age was unusually young. He didn't make any unnecessary movements and directly walked forward, casting his gaze over to the auction stage. The experienced auctioneer's gaze met the youngster's. For some inexplicable reason, he was a little dazed. The absurd order that entered his ears seemed to have become his own thoughts, and he blurted out in a daze. The next auction item will be displayed by the auction house's special guest. Halfway through his sentence, the auctioneer paused. This was because he clearly saw that after the youngster walked onto the stage, his originally casual and informal attire actually transformed out of thin air into a rather decent formal suit. He even wore a bow tie. The only difference was that his age did not match him. Why did this formal suit look exactly the same as him? The auctioneer's face was full of shock, and he was stunned on the stage. For a portion of the bidders below the stage, the series of changes had a rather dramatic effect. There was clearly going to be an exchange between the experienced auctioneer and the youngster who had suddenly appeared and performed magic. After all, not everyone was filled with such thoughts. There were quite a few people on this enormous cruise ship that gathered the most cutting-edge researchers and investors in distortion technology. They were completely ignorant of the undercurrents beneath the auction. And it was precisely this group of people who rather approved of the stage effect before their eyes. They began to applaud and laugh out of sincerity or out of politeness. There was indeed quite a bit of momentum. But not long after, these claps and laughter were extinguished by the indescribably stagnant atmosphere around them. This caused the atmosphere of the auction to become even more bizarre. Luonan smoothly replaced the original auctioneer under the attention of all sorts of gazes. He stood behind the auction stage. The stage was a bit high, but it was still acceptable. He stood still and faced the participants of the auction like this, as well as the various cameras. He took a light breath and revealed a smile towards the place where the laughter had first come from. He used a seemingly professional tone to begin his speech. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very sorry. Actually, I really wanted to say that those of you who can still laugh right now, please leave immediately. This is because you don't know anything. This is a good thing. Sometimes, knowledge itself is pain. The best way to preserve happiness is to maintain ignorance. These words caused the expressions of many people to change. Luonan continued speaking without a care. Please forgive me if my words have offended you. After all, I'm young, and this is my first time on the stage. I'm not an expert in matters such as auctions. The reason why I'm able to cross over to host is because I have a background. Actually, there are many people seated here who know me, but there are also many people who don't. There is indeed a certain distance between my circle and everyone else's. Therefore, before I introduce the auction item, please allow me to introduce myself. Chapter 1082. My name is Luonan. I'm 17 years old this year. I'm a 10th grade student at Acumen College in Xia City. Luonan was very serious and very solemn as he announced his true identity from behind the auction stage. It was because of this truth that a sense of dislocation was formed. This caused this auction to instantly become the scene of a youth group's speech competition. Emotions of astonishment and absurdity interweaved within the brilliantly lit auction house. Even though Luonan had just given them a cold stab, there were still quite a few people present. They hesitated whether or not they should laugh and support him. In reality, the atmosphere of the auction house was indeed slipping towards a speech competition. Luonan stood ramrod straight, allowing the auction stage to cover most of his body from his chest down. The visual effect really couldn't be described as tall and straight. Only his enunciation was clear. There's one reason why I'm standing here. It's because of the current auction item. The large screen behind him displayed the equipment that had been moved out from the 70 format laboratory and the corresponding annotations. It let all the bidders present know that this auction item included the original location of the Wilderness Laboratory that housed this equipment in addition to the equipment on the stage. This was a temporary layout of the auction house. The original stage was originally planned to be on the lower level, but it was already being pulled up to display the real thing. But due to Luonan's methods, the stage was torn to pieces. It was already impossible to continue with the original plan. It could only be transferred through the lens. It was hard on the staff of the auction house. These professionals specialized in visual effects were able to use light and shadow effects to create a desolate feeling of order amidst the chaos within the lens of this chaotic scene. This gave off a bit of a feeling of a stage play. Luonan seemed to be moved at this time. This is what my grandfather who has gone mad, my father whose life and death is unknown, and my mother who has already passed away. There are also a few seniors that I know and don't know. They single-handedly created this place in the wilderness. It represents their life experiences and achievement. It is also one of the few places that I know of that I can pay homage to. The dislocation of the bitters below the stage became even more clear. Some people were hesitant, wondering whether or not they should accompany Luonan with tears of sympathy to show their cooperation. Of course, there were even more people who were confused by Luonan's inexplicable speech. The whispers within the auction house were getting louder and louder. People needed to clearly understand the true logic behind this absurd scene. But at this time, Luonan laughed first. After saying so much, everyone should be able to tell that I obviously don't want to sell it. But someone beat me to it and sent it to the auction house. They even deliberately came to show off to me. There's nothing I can do. Luonan just smiled like this. His gaze swept across the field. It didn't matter if it was the hall or the private room. As long as he wanted to look, there was nothing that could obstruct him. At this time, he was the focus of everyone's attention. Luonan raised his left hand and gestured with 2 fingers. As for the other reason, isn't there a saying? No. In order to prevent this kind of thing from happening again in the future, although I am not a member of this circle, I must come here to face all the buyers and communicate with as many people as possible. I need you to know me, my mood, my thoughts, and my decisions, and to be able to seriously refer to and evaluate them. It's even better if you can get the corresponding respect. He was clearly smiling, but because of these words, the noise in the venue suddenly weakened. Many tycoons and experts who were whispering to each other subconsciously raised their heads and looked at the stage. His words were subtle and filled with hostility. Luonan continued to express his position. I'm still a student right now. I don't have a formal job. I can only rely on my limited lecture time to obtain some labor fees. At the same time, he had a lot of expenses, such as personal experiments, family security, and other miscellaneous expenses. He also owed a lot of debts and his assets were really limited. He really did not belong to the same world as everyone else, and basically did not follow the same logic. Therefore, I can only use other, unconventional methods that everyone might not be familiar with to achieve my goals. Here, I have to thank the Toyama Auction House for giving me such an opportunity, allowing me to host this event and use this place to communicate with everyone. The trouble caused to the auction house. Mr. Toyama, right? Although you're not here, you should be paying attention to this. Luonan took the initiative to accurately find the camera. He borrowed the signal of the live broadcast to communicate with someone tens of thousands of kilometers away. Like this, I'll treat it as the interest you guys paid. I'll also consider forgiving you guys. Whether or not there were people smashing cups in Banqing, thousands of miles away, they didn't know. But at this moment, the venue was already completely silent. Sound. He looks just like a terrorist. Abner, Constance, Star Shaman, and Romanus sat together in a certain luxurious suite some distance away from the venue. These 4 extraordinaries, who served in the Ability User Society's headquarters, were watching the live broadcast of the auction. Actually, they were looking at Luonan's attitude and performance. However, the evaluation was not made by any one of the 4. It was made by the old Witch of Death, who grew increasingly talkative as she grew older. Her real-time vibrations on the mental plane were enough to ensure that she could communicate with the other 4 extraordinaries without hindrance. Star Shaman was freed from the awkwardness of being a sound transmission puppet. His mouth appeared to be exceptionally lively, echoing with his teacher as he reprimanded Luonan. Is he trying to push the wall? Is he trying to expose the disputes of the inner world in front of everyone? This doesn't conform to the agreement we signed with the Star Alliance Committee. The people here barely have the authority to do so, Abner responded simply. As a genuine special guest of the auction, Abner did not participate in the event. One reason was that he needed to participate in the process had already been erased due to a minor accident. The other reason was that there was no need to step into Luo Nan's most sensitive domain during this special period of time. He felt that his previous expression was too vague, but he was unwilling to say too much, so he cast his gaze toward Romanus. Romanus immediately explained, "Currently, Mr. Luo Nan's actions really don't conform to the procedures of the inner world. However, 69% of the people here have the authority to know the truth. The remaining people can basically be adjusted to a certain level. There will be a corresponding psychological specialist to handle the situation. It won't cause too much trouble." Romanus paused for a moment before adding, "When inviting others to participate in this sort of fringe event, it is clear that the inviting party and not the invited party that should bear the costs and the corresponding responsibilities. The Toyama auction house is not thorough enough in this regard." The corner of Star Shaman's lips twitched, but he just laughed it off in the end. In any case, it didn't matter if Abner said it himself or if Romanus explained it on his behalf. The change in attitude that was manifested was not something that could be hidden from others. Everyone present understood the reason. Death Shaman's telepathic thoughts flowed through the void, containing a subtle meaning. This kid doesn't seem like someone who can cooperate. Chapter 1083. Abner didn't respond. He just narrowed his eyes and focused on Luo Nan on the screen. He watched as this young man used a calmness that didn't match his age to communicate with the audience and everyone who was paying attention to the scene. This kind of scene was no longer the same as the first public lecture last year, where he only talked to himself in the professional field. It was also different from the almost one-sided display on the Zeolite Beach 2 days ago. The current Luo Nan seemed to have begun to pay attention to feedback. At the very least, he had begun to deliberately grab the attention of the people, deliberately provoking the emotions of the people. Just like right now. Since I'm in this position, I have to fulfill my duties as an auctioneer. Let's forget about the exaggerated statements on the screen and in the booklet. Frankly speaking, they're miles away from the main point. Luo Nan seemed to have returned to the main topic. He began to introduce the auction item, but he began with a rhetorical question. It seemed that he was very happy to interact with the bidders at the scene. How many people think that they are just a set of equipment and the address of an abandoned laboratory? It no longer has any practical value, and can only satisfy the hobby of a few people? No one responded. The bidders at the scene did not respond enthusiastically enough, because a considerable number of them had not figured out the situation, at least, not yet. Should they feign ignorance now? What about sneaking away? Or should he cooperate obediently? The atmosphere at the scene was somewhat awkward, especially in the eyes of the bystanders. The Star Sorcerer found it a little funny. This person is really full of resentment. However, what's the use of getting angry at these people? Should I answer my own questions? Or do you want to perform stand-up? Luo Nan laughed from behind the auction stage as he spoke. The audience was clearly cold, but Luo Nan looked like he had a card up his sleeve. There are quite a lot of them. There are about 31 or 32 of them. That's about 1/5 of the total, and it overlaps with the initial laughter. This means that everyone here really doesn't know anything about this. You're still a distance away from our circle. At the very least, you haven't come into contact with the most valuable things yet. I still have to work hard on the next step. As for this, in my opinion, it's best not to join in the fun. However, if he still hadn't made up his mind to leave, it might mean that he didn't have the chance to leave. Thus, he decided to just be a witness. Believe me, there is a reason for your existence. Where did he learn to act like a charlatan? The star shaman couldn't help but speak again, but his brows were already furrowed. There's still a round number. What right does he have to say that? Information? Speculation? Speaking skills? Shut up. The frequency of the old woman's mind oscillation increased slightly, and she displayed a different emotion. The room was silent for a time. Luo Nan continued to speak in a manner that was neither too fast nor too slow. I can see it too. I also don't know. There are some differences inside. There are some gentlemen and ladies who don't know about it, and they really don't know about it at all. But there are some gentlemen, yes, I'm talking about the one at table number 4, who is facing me, the one who is hugging girls on both sides. His heart is obviously clear, but his beautiful female companions are all clueless about it. This is a bit too much. This kind of frivolous joke was meant to tickle people's armpits. Most of the people present were experienced people who had been in business for a long time, so there were very few who laughed along with him. This was also because of Luo Nan's direction. The people present were all reputable characters. They were directly called out by name, and the surrounding gazes were focused on them. It was hard for them to keep their faces. However, the person who was named was really stunned. It was obvious from his appearance that he was shocked. His anger was greater than his anger, and he had a classic expression on his face, as if his thoughts had been exposed. Don't be embarrassed, mister. Thank you for hearing about me from who knows where. Even though I don't know what your name is, there are quite a few people like you who are too much. Everyone should know this in their hearts. I know this as well. Luo Nan's bright gaze swept across the room once more. It seemed to be undirected, but practically everyone subconsciously lowered their gazes. They averted their gazes to avoid meeting his gaze, which seemed to be able to pierce through all secrets. Abner wasn't present, but he still unconsciously adjusted his sitting posture. He wasn't sure if Luo Nan really possessed the ability to read minds, but no one present had raised any objections up until now. Moreover, they had instinctively developed fear in their hearts. This proved that Luo Nan had already achieved initial control over the situation. He could place the emotions of over 100 billionaires and industry elites in the palm of his hand and knead them. This was becoming more and more different from past intelligence. Luo Nan began to fiddle with the remote control on the auction stage. He adjusted the display angle of the equipment on the large screen. Actually, there's no need for everyone's thoughts to be too complicated. In terms of pure equipment, only a few people have collectible value. But those who believe that it has collectible value are basically clear about the true value hidden behind it. The main thing is the location of its location, the object of its research, and the fact that it can be grasped. Me. Luo Nan's tone sounded careless. His words came from wherever he was thinking. But it was unknown how many people in the auction house were dripping with cold sweat because of his words. Their legs were trembling. Yes, more and more people were coming back to their senses. They had allowed this killing star, known as the humanoid infrasonic array, to come to the scene and stir up such havoc. How could there be anything good in the future? What's up with the Toyama auction house? What's up with Wang Yu? What's up with those people at headquarters? Could it be that the rumors were true? That the situation had spiraled out of control? There were already people looking all around, looking for a way to escape. There were also people who had begun to summon their bodyguard. Of course, contacting the organizers and co-organizers was also a very common choice. There were people who directly called Abner. Yes, it was through Romanus, the Secretary-General. Abner had already entered a state of communication silence. He was the highest leader of the society in this critical moment. Whether it was in name or in reality, he needed to leave some leeway for final adjustments. Romanus was very experienced in this aspect. Although the people who were able to call him were all big shots who had gone through many rounds of requests, he was still able to calmly respond no matter what request the other party made. Actually, there weren't any new tricks. It was nothing more than targeting Luo Nan. Requests to stop him, reprimands, pleads, and so on. During this period of time, Romanus spoke the most words. We are actively communicating with Mr. Luonan. We have transmitted a clear signal, and we await his reply. This was the honest truth. Of course, everyone understood the second half of the unfinished sentence. Luonan had already received their words, but he didn't give a clear response. Romanus repeated the same sentence pattern and meaning many times, but he didn't show the slightest bit of impatience. He also didn't show any resentment towards Luonan. This was because he understood very well that if he were to stand in Luonan's position, he wouldn't be clear either. He borrowed this thinking space to toss and turn a few things. He wanted to probe the bottom line of headquarters a step further. This was the smartest choice. Abner took the initiative to release a signal of cooperation to Luonan through the dual channels of Blood Demon and Her Majesty Empress Wu. He didn't explicitly state the method or the time limit of the feedback. The 2 hours from 8 in the evening to 10 in the evening were tantamount to giving Luonan a window to express and vent his emotions. Everyone was calculating their own bottom line, recalculating. Luonan was acting recklessly right now. Of course they were nervous, but they could also observe the intentions of the other party. If Luonan had straightforwardly agreed to headquarters' request and maintained a relatively calm and reserved manner, they would have breathed a sigh of relief right now. However, they would absolutely not express their thanks in a formal meeting. On the contrary, they would certainly take a step forward and launch an attack, all the way until they touched Luonan's bottom line. Luonan's current lack of response was precisely a display of taking the initiative. For the time being, this was correct. Everything was within expectations, but there was one thing that Romanus didn't understand. What was the true meaning behind Luonan's venting? Was it purely for considerations of the negotiation situation? This conjecture was admittedly reasonable, but it didn't quite match with Luonan's way of thinking, which they grasped. Even if Luonan's current behavior in public was more mature than before and had made great progress, there shouldn't be too many deviations in his innermost core. Luonan was a stubborn youth who always focused on all sorts of regular structures. He tended to use a set of logical programs to deal with all problems. How could he suddenly become a great charlatan who stirred people's hearts? This wasn't a question of understanding or not. It depended on whether or not his knowledge and ability system could support him. For this reason, Romanus had two conjectures. First, Luonan's knowledge structure was more complete and profound than people's previous judgments, deductions, and conjectures. He possessed an even more powerful system to support him. Second, perhaps there was a more direct and purer goal behind the seemingly complex schemes of the human heart? Romanus walked to the balcony outside the suite for the sake of answering the phone. This was one of the areas with the best view on the Jade Light, but right now he could only see the flickering lights of the ship. The surrounding area was flooded with dark clouds and waves. His eyes weren't good, and his mental senses were warped and disturbed by the increasingly complex changes in the magnetic field. Though it wasn't to the extent of being blind with one's eyes wide open, Luonan felt as if he had missed something. It was as if he had missed some extremely important details. Or perhaps they had never understood the details of the book. Luonan's voice was transmitted and restored in the room through the digital signal. There's a very complicated thread of story behind this set of equipment. There are some things that even I don't quite understand. Perhaps there are some people here who know more than I do. Yep, I can't limit myself to the scene. There are some gentlemen and ladies who are paying attention to this place through the live broadcast signal. They are much clearer than I am. But no matter what others think, since I'm standing here, I will do my utmost to display its value. It won't just be a gimmick to display my strength and a tool to pinch others. And I believe that this process will bear corresponding fruit. I will piece together more truths. This isn't something that can be changed by the will of certain people. Romanus turned around just in time to see Luonan's smile on the screen. It was exceptionally brilliant. Chapter 1084. What an incredible young man! Machiko Kawahara was standing in the center of the exhibition hall in Area C. In front of her was the arc-shaped booth that was torn apart by an unknown force. But now the original outline could no longer be seen. People's attention was more easily attracted by the broken cracks themselves. These cracks were so huge that there was no support between the pieces of the booth. It seemed that it was impossible to resist the heavy equipment above and could collapse at any time. However, they stood there steadily. The closer they were, the more details they saw, the more incredible it was. According to the original plan, this place should have been upgraded to the next floor before the auction started and served as the main exhibition area. But at this time, the young man who was talking in the venue directly ruined this plan. However, some pre-installed equipment around it could still work, so this place was temporarily enclosed and used as half of the backstage. At this time, many staff members were walking back and forth here, dealing with various problems, at least on the surface. No matter how busy the staff members were, they carefully bypassed the central booth area. At the same time, there were some researchers with different backgrounds, carrying large and small instruments, carefully walking through the cracks in the steel, trying to find more valuable clues. Two different circles temporarily went hand in hand with each other. Machiko Kawahara was here. Through the ubiquitous screens and projections, she was paying attention to the progress of the auction. She watched the young man who completely distorted the trajectory of her life speak on the stage. He also distorted the thoughts and wills of others. Surprisingly, she didn't have too much resentment. She was more envious, and she thought of her son. If Jia can become like this when he grows up, it should be something to be proud of. She didn't have much feelings for her tool husband, but her stubborn and cute young son was one of the important fulcrum of her life. Just thinking about the future a little, even if it was mostly fantasy elements, could remove some of the barriers in her heart and reduce some of the pressure. This rare moment of freedom did not last for long. Because of the series of changes at the auction site, while the headquarters was under pressure, they also transmitted more intense pressure and even emotions. Bastard! How can you change the process and personnel of the auction at will? Are you going to bet on Toyama's decades of reputation? Machiko Kawahara took a deep breath, adjusted her breathing, and answered with an appropriate calm attitude. Vice President, I am following the instructions of the Board of Directors. I have obtained Mr. Luonan's understanding. I haven't occupied any resources outside of my authority. The voice on the other side suddenly rose a notch. So you're using the reputation of the Toyama family as a bargaining chip and recklessly throwing it out? Obviously, Shingo Toyama, the grandson of President Kenta Toyama, was so angry that he blurted out some inappropriate words. However, he wasn't completely stupid. He forcefully turned the situation around. The board of directors only gave you the order to control the unsold, and no other authority. Are you trying to be smart, or are you deliberately avoiding the question? Look at the situation now. That damned brat actually named the president. How much pressure and passivity will this bring to the company? Vice President, forgive me for having a different opinion. Machiko Kawahara still maintained a calm tone. I believe that compared to actively creating an unsold auction in public, passively accepting underpower should be more reasonable and easier for people to understand. After all, the other side was an influential figure in the upper-class circle. Moreover, as an executive and as a negotiator, I have the authority to temporarily change the process of the first-level auction. No, you don't. Shingo Toyama was practically roaring. If I were merely a sounding board, then the board of directors wouldn't need to send me thousands of miles away to the Pacific Ocean. Machiko Kawahara's voice had a bit more of a biting cold metallic tone. Forgive me for speaking frankly, but according to your understanding, Vice President, you don't expect or hope for this public relations to achieve results. Is it to avoid a momentary victory that magnifies one's own inferiority under power? There was a crash on the other side, and it was unknown what had fallen. Shingo Toyama's voice was clenched into a ball in his fury. He rolled in his throat. Kawahara, are you sure you know what you're saying? Even if you're the representative of the Kawahara clan, you're throwing your clan's face into the mud when you're saying these wild and absurd words. How shameful, Kawahara! I'm truly sorry. Michiko Kawahara used an insincere tone to respond. I will reflect on myself. Please forgive me for being overly excited after completing this mission. Then she hung up the call. Her lips drew a biting cold arc, and it just so happened that Luonan's brilliant smile echoed it. The Kawahara clan? Wasn't she already prepared when she was pushed out without hesitation? Was she prepared to sacrifice herself? There really was a truth hidden in the words she spoke to her subordinates before this. She already didn't have the qualifications to return. At the very least, she didn't have the status as an executive. Before and after she accepted this troublesome task, she had also heard similar rumors, but she could not find any reasonable logic in it. Therefore, she still had a glimmer of hope, and even the miraculous fantasy of a lower class overturning the upper class. But now she was disappointed. It was as she said. The board of directors wasn't prepared to succeed at all. They really did want to abandon her, and only she was allowed to be abandoned. Under these circumstances, her efforts had turned into rebellion. This wasn't a good sign. Michiko Kawahara was an outstanding woman who often struggled in the business world, especially in a region like Banqing that traditionally lacked strong women. Her will was very firm for her to be able to stand out. She was already prepared to experience a low tide in her heart. She wasn't prepared to go back and suffer the reprimand and humiliation of those old fellows who had decided her fate. She was aware of the consequences of internal strife, but she couldn't accept this misfortune that was like winning the lottery. She would just directly transfer to a flight in D-City. She would go to the new continent or the old continent's inland cities and nurse her body and mind. She would make plans after the rumors died down. Her accumulation over the years, whether in terms of wealth or connections, was enough to support her to live a leisurely life. Of course, Koji, who was staying in Banqing, was also a problem. The identity of the fourth-generation heir of the Kawahara family might not be so secure. If it really didn't work out, she would agree to a family marriage after a period of deadlock. She was still quite valuable in the eyes of the 40 to 80 generations of Banqing's political and business community. Or, she could find a suitable son-in-law and use marriage to try to climb up in a new field. Michiko Kawahara calmly planned the future for herself and began to circle some preliminary candidate. She knew that this was another form of pressure relief. But in any case, it was meaningless to stay on the Jade Light. Michiko Kawahara glanced at the dazzling young man on the auction stage again and directly turned around to leave. At the same time, she contacted her secretary to arrange the follow-up itinerary. Executive Director Kawahara, you can't leave. Suddenly, someone rushed in front of her and blocked her way. Michiko Kawahara was shocked. At this time, the broken booth behind her suddenly made a harsh friction sound, and it was getting louder and louder. It was like the prelude to the collapse of the whole thing.